the government works. We can do a check. How are you, sir? He's like, a lot of times they do center outlays.
The House will come to order. Members, please take your seats. Sergeant at Arms.
The House is now in session. All persons not entitled to privileges on the floor, please retire to the gallery.
The members will rise and be led in prayer by the Reverend Canon Jonathan J.D. Osterman, pastor of the Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist, Marshall, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, led by the gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Let us pray. We beseech thee, O Lord, mercifully to behold this house of delegates assembled here this day. We ask that they be always mindful that they have been elected to serve the people of this Commonwealth, and grant that they may ever walk worthy of their calling. Laying aside all divisions, may they be united in heart and mind to bear the burdens which are laid upon them. Enable them to discharge their responsibilities in mercy and in truth according to their several powers. Put far from them selfish indifference to the needs of others, and give them grace to fulfill their duties with sober diligence. Keep them from all uncharitableness in word or deed, and enable them by patient continuance in well-doing to glorify thy name through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The members will answer the roll call by indicating their presence on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Pursuant to House Rule 3, I've examined and approved the Journal of the House of Delegates for February 24th, 2016. Motions and resolutions under Rule 39 are now in order. Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
I have both, Mr. Speaker. Communication from the Senate. The Senate has rejected the House amendments to Senate Bill 336.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House insist on its amendments and request a committee of conference on the previously reported legislation.
Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to.
And, Mr. Speaker, I'd simply remind the body that objections to committee amendments were due by 11. We've received those, have lists of them up here, and the budget bill will be considered upon the conclusion of the morning hour pursuant to the special and continuing order that's been set for the two budget bills.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd like to report some tragic news for our Commonwealth. Yesterday afternoon, with severe storms coming through parts of our state, tornadoes came down in several areas in the county of Sussex, in the town of Waverly. Had 3 people who were killed, including a 2-year-old little boy. Tornadoes hitting in Appomattox County and Essex County. Destruction was severe and extensive, and I have a huge thank you to our state police, local first responders, and just good Virginians who responded to those in need. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to request that our thoughts and prayers go with those who are killed and injured and all those affected by this storm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rise for an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today joining us, I hope they made it into the gallery. They're at least around the Capitol. And if they are in the gallery, I hope they please stand. Our students from the Community Home Learning Circle, also known as CLIC. CLIC is a secular free-flow homeschool cooperative catering to Louisa County homeschool families. And I would just hope the House would give them a warm welcome to the Capitol today.
The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, on Tuesday of this week, Virginia lost a true statesman. Madison Ellis Marie was born in Richmond in 1925. Madison served his country in the U.S. Army, Mr. Speaker, in World War II, the Korean War, and in Vietnam. He retired from the Army as a major. He left the Army and moved back to Shawsville, Virginia, which is, those of you who know the Roanoke and New River Valleys, it sits in between Roanoke and Blacksburg. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Marie, ultimately Senator Marie, settled down as a beef cattle farmer and opened a gas station, but Mr. Speaker, politics was always in his blood. He was the great-grandson of President John Tyler. He wisely ran for the House of Delegates in 1973. He actually lost that first election, but this House's loss was the Senate's gain as he turned around immediately thereafter and was elected to the state Senate in a special election, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, he served for 29 years in the state Senate, and he was referred to by lots of names. He was called a folksy populist. He was called a fierce fighter. He always said he, quote, fought for the little man. He had a habit, those of you who may have known him, of telling every story in the guise of Uncle Billy, his fictional uncle back home. And much like the gentleman from Appomattox, his grandmother, Uncle Billy, oftentimes had the ability to change the outcome of legislation. Mr. Speaker, in 2001, Madison Marie's seat was redrawn and moved into Northern Virginia. So for a year, the gentleman from Shawsville, the country farmer from out west, actually represented some of you big city folks in Nova. With a year left on his term, he decided he was no longer the best person to represent those folks, and he gracefully retired after 29 years of service. Mr. Speaker, Madison Marie's known for a lot of things. One of the things most remarkable to me and appropriate here on Black History Month is that as a country farmer from Southwest Virginia, he was the first state senator to endorse Doug Wilder in his run for lieutenant governor. In fact, he gave a fairly famous and powerful speech on the floor of the Senate endorsing both Mary Sue Terry for Attorney General and Doug Wilder for Lieutenant Governor, and pointing out that he hoped our state had come to the point where an African American and a female were qualified and acceptable as statewide candidates. And Mr. Speaker, while Senator Marie and I were of different parties, he was always incredibly gracious. As a high school student, I had the honor of meeting with him as part of the Model Judiciary Program, and he made every one of us feel like our ideas mattered and could actually help the Commonwealth. In my later years, once I was elected to serve the General Assembly and my district was redrawn to pick up Madison's precinct, he would stand with me at the polling location, two men of different generations of different parties. He would introduce me to every one of his friends. He would tell them he and I disagreed on a few issues here and there, but that I was a good man. And Mr. Speaker, one of the great honors of my life is to have Senator Madison Marie tell his friends that I was a good man. So we truly lost a statesman at the age of 90 this Tuesday. He'll be missed in our region. He meant so much that I can't even tell, but his fingerprints will last on our region and our Commonwealth forever. So for Mr. Speaker, for all those and the other reasons I can't say today, I hope that this body will adjourn today in the honor and memory of Senator Madison Marie.
The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib, moves that when the House adjourn today, it adjourn in the honor and memory of Senator Madison Marie. As many as favor that motion will please rise. That motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Danville, Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Speaker, I'll rise for an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the Virginia Agribusiness Council is up in the gallery today, and I ask them to please stand, which is the #1 Virginia business. So agriculture and forestry, the total economic impact of agriculture and forestry related industries in Virginia was almost $70 billion in 2011. The total employment impact was approximately over 414,000 employees. The total value added impact was $35 billion, which makes up 8.1% of the state's gross domestic product. Every job created in agriculture and forestry-related industries results in another 1.6 jobs to the Virginia economy, and every dollar generated in value added, it creates another $1.63 value added in Virginia's economy. Please, let's welcome our friends from Agribusiness Council.
We're delighted to see our friends from the Agribusiness Council, and we thank you for all that you do for the Commonwealth. Gentleman from Petersburg, Ms. Aird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, today I ask you, if Black history were a song, how many beautiful notes would go unsung? How many melodies would go unheard? Too many, unfortunately. Too often, the stories of so many who struggled, strived, survived, and thrived in the face of daunting adversity go untold. Today, I want to pay homage to those unmentioned trailblazers by honoring two historic institutions that were built on their blood, sweat, and tears. I want us all to remember them. Today, I remember the religious community like the First Baptist Church of Petersburg and Pocahontas Island in Petersburg, built in the midst of slavery and, with graceful defiance, leaving an indelible mark on Black history that transcends generations. Petersburg's African history began in Pocahontas Island, the oldest surviving African-American community in the United States. It grew to become the earliest predominantly free Black community in Virginia and among the first in North America. Its location at the crest of the Appomattox River contributed to integral commercial development and trade activities, aiding to Petersburg's economic success. In the beginning of the 19th century, Pocahontas Island served as a notable intersection of Underground Railroad, assisting fugitive slaves traveling to freedom. Like the community established on Pocahontas Island, the First Baptist Church of Petersburg contributed to the growth of the free Black population in the South. They were organized in 1774 in Prince George and later moved to Petersburg. First Baptist Church preached against slavery and delivered a message of equality. As newly freed African Americans gravitated towards Petersburg from surrounding plantations, members of the religious community guided and ministered to those in need. Their fight for equality did not end there. They were forerunners in the 20th century civil rights era, holding protest meetings, voter education and registration, and much more. Today, Pocahontas Island has families that are 12 generations strong, and First Baptist Church and numerous other institutions stand as an auspicious beacon of strength. The Petersburg community has served as one of the nation's most influential forces as it relates to Black history in the Commonwealth and around our nation. To the invisible heroes who were the lifeblood of these communities and institutions, their daily lives were simply routine means of survival in an unforgiving environment. I wonder sometimes if they knew that little by little, they were laying the foundation for people like me and so many more. Their courage strengthens me, but our forgetfulness pains me, which is why it is incumbent upon me to ensure that everything they worked for is not in vain. So here's to the unsung heroes, the nameless heroes, who built communities and institutions like those that I represent that thrive today and are too often washed away in a sea of time. As we near the end of February, I hope that during this month and every month ahead, let's commit to remembering each of these individuals as if they were notes to a song, a rich, transcendent soundtrack of Black history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fauquier, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us today was the Reverend Canon Jonathan J.D. Ostman, currently serves as the rector at the Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist in my hometown of Marshall, Virginia. Father Ostman was born in Bangkok, Thailand, where his parents served as missionaries. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin with a Bachelor of Science, he pursued a career as a biochemist, which led him to continue his studies at the London School of Economics. While in London, he sensed God's call to the priesthood. He returned to the United States. He entered the Virginia Theological Seminary, where he graduated cum laude with a Master of Divinity. Father Ostman took his first postgraduate position as curate at All Saints Church in Wynwood, Pennsylvania, where he served from 1989 to 1991. In 1991, Father Ostman moved to Newport, Rhode Island to become rector of the Church of St. John the Evangelist. During the almost 16 years he spent in Newport, Father Ostman became involved in the Anglican Communion around the world. And he took a series of mini sabbaticals with the Diocese of Matabeleland, Zimbabwe, in the province of Central Africa. Due to his work there, Father Ostman was made an honorary canon of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. He came to the Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist in 2007 with his wife and high school sweetheart, Mary, whom he married in 1974. He can most often be found at the parish office with his Chow Chow Bella the Beautiful, and she is a gorgeous dog. The Anglican parish of St. John the Baptist was formed in 1991 and originally met in the parishioners' homes. It moved to its current location in Marshall, Virginia in the mid-90s and has an active and thriving church body. The Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist strives to represent the values of the Anglican Church: purity of belief, worship, and practice. And the church is at the corner of our main street and is most certainly a big portion of the foundation of our town. I ask the House to give a warm welcome to Reverend Ostman.
Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, visiting with us in the Capitol today from Caroline County Public Schools, we have Ms. Kathleen Bean and Ms. Jennifer Moore. Please stand. Hope you'll join me in giving their friends from Caroline a warm house welcome.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, yesterday, the Middle Peninsula also suffered a catastrophic disaster. The town of Tappahannock and the surrounding communities in Essex were hit by at least one powerful tornado, which destroyed or damaged many homes and resulted in at least 35 injuries. We are thankful that no lives were lost in Essex, but more in the loss of homes, belongings, memories, and a sense of security that are not easily replaced. For many of these families, the home that they know it is gone. Mr. Speaker, a horrific event like this shows how folks in Virginia come together. While in Tappahannock late last night and early this morning, I observed quickly how command posts, search and rescue, and emergency medical services were set up. This is quickly followed by an outpouring of churches, civic organizations, the Red Cross, and many others to focus on the family's needs. Emergency services providers from across the region, the state, and local agencies, and caring neighbors, they came together to help. I cannot say enough about these individuals, many of whom braved dangerous conditions, indeed putting themselves in peril to help their neighbors. The recovery will be an arduous process, but with the support of state, federal, and local agencies and volunteers from around the state, this community will pull together, as Virginians do, to ensure that the victims of this natural disaster are quickly back on their feet and back to their day-to-day routines. This morning, Congressman Rob Whitman and I spent time with a couple who just paid off their mortgage and just paid off their vehicles. After living in their home for 22 years, they were on the cusp of retirement. They relayed to us the story of how the tornado approached, how they went into the basement, locked arms together in the bathtub, and they prayed. Mr. Speaker, somehow, and I don't know how, they made it out alive. Their homes, their cars, their possessions, they're all gone today, and they lean on each other and the community for support. When we saw the husband this morning, he was armed with a chainsaw, standing in a pile of rubble, in a pile of debris, trying to salvage what he could. This is only one of many stories that we heard as we traveled throughout the area. Now, Mr. Speaker, our thoughts and prayers remain with the other localities around the Commonwealth that were also hit and impacted by this storm. Please lift up the towns of Appomattox and Waverly in your prayers as they mourn the loss of life in their communities. Mr. Speaker, may God bless the Commonwealth, and today especially bless those communities affected by this horrific event. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery today, joining us are some cadets from Fork Union Military Academy. If they would please stand. When people think about Fork Union Military Academy, which is an all-boys Christian military boarding college prep school in Fork Union, Virginia, they often think about the athletic champions that it has produced with names like Plaxico Burress and Heisman Trophy winners Vinny Testaverde and Eddie George. But Fork Union also produces champions in the classroom and in academic pursuits and intellectual pursuits. And we have some of those champions with us today. These are members of the Fork Union debate team. These fellows all compete in the Student Congress division, and this year they have brought home numerous trophies and a first place trophy for the team as a whole. Matter of fact, they have a record number of 9 members that have qualified for the upcoming state tournament and are hopeful that they'll be able to do quite well with that. They are joined today by their team coach, Captain Mike Goad, and I will also say that for the record, if you look at the name tags and see the one that says Head MP, he's not in fact in charge of their security detail, but that is my son Michael. So hope that the House will give them a warm house welcome.
We welcome the Fork Union debate team. We congratulate you on your many accomplishments and wish you the best in the future. Thank you for being here today. The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Myarias.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, joining us in the gallery today is retired Navy Commander Scott Lang. He joined the United States Navy in 1985, where he got what some people say is the real Navy, got his start in destroyers. Then the Navy decided the world was in desperate need of another lawyer and sent him off to law school, where he was editor-in-chief of the Naval Law Review. After that, he became a Navy JAG officer and became a liaison with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he prosecuted a variety of federal crimes. He was recognized in 1999 as the National Prosecutor of the Year. And then, as so many individuals, on that fateful morning of September 11, 2001, his life was forever changed. Because after that, the Pentagon decided they need the very best of the best prosecutors in the country to prosecute the worst of the worst terrorists. And he made a very fateful decision to leave behind and split his time between his young family in Virginia to go to Guantanamo Bay, where for 3 years he was a war crimes and terrorism prosecutor, prosecuting some of the most vile and heinous terrorists this world has ever seen, including bin Laden's bodyguard. After 3 years of that, he then decided to join the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney in Virginia Beach, where he could live more of a sane life. And he had an opportunity, I guess, to mentor a very young prosecutor in that office, myself, a couple years after law school. He rose to become one of the chief deputies in the office, prosecuted over 1,200 felony cases, had over a 95% conviction rate. But most importantly, he is what I call a silent servant. I know the gentleman from Shenandoah and the gentleman from Albemarle understand this as former prosecutors themselves, but 2/3 of all crimes are committed by repeat offenders. And oftentimes when we had the most difficult murder cases with some of the most evil perpetrators, it would be Mr. Lang that'd be leading the charge. And so I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that there are people today alive in the Commonwealth that are alive because individuals like Mr. Lang took the time to take these people off our streets and our communities safe. Mr. Speaker, his service to our country, both in the Navy and into our Commonwealth, spanned 30 years, from 1985 to last year, 2015, when he left the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. Mr. Speaker, these silent servants oftentimes don't get the recognition they deserve and what they do to keep us safe. And I would like the House to give a very warm welcome to a great Virginian, Commander Scott Lang.
The gentlewoman from Sussex, Ms. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had an opportunity to ride down to my district in Sussex County to the little town of Waverly. As we heard on the news last night that 3 individuals were killed and one of them was a 2-year-old child. Mr. Speaker, it was wonderful to see so much community support from the emergency services, from volunteers, from Red Cross, responding to this tragic in Waverly, Virginia. But nonetheless, my heart is kind of broken this morning because one of these individuals that was killed in the trauma or killed in the tornado was one of my good friends, Larry Turner. And I've known Larry for a very, very long time. And matter of fact, I used to mentor Mr. Turner and try to get him to continue his education. But in regards to that, Larry wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't rich, but he was a good community organizer. And when I called on him, he always had a word to say, a good word to say for me, but also a very supportive of his community. But I was reassured when I went down to Waverly and I talked to my constituents that the state would help them with all their concerns and needs. And as I headed back up here this afternoon for session, it was good to know that the governor and Secretary Moran was on their way to assess the disaster. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to say thank you to the Commonwealth, thank you to the governor, and thank you to Secretary Moran for their prompt response to a small town in need. And let us keep in prayer the victims, our other communities other than Waverly, that we know that the Commonwealth got our backs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
The gentleman has the floor.
Speaker, I think this is my last group of Manchester students, but I'm sure the best group of Manchester students. They're in the gallery, 50 AP students with their teacher, Kristen Larkart, observing the Capitol. So I hope the House will give them a warm round of applause if they would stand.
We're delighted to have the students from Manchester with us. Hope you enjoy your time at the Capitol. The gentleman from Newport News, Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, today in the gallery we are honored to have from the Embassy of Japan, Minister Konihiko Kawazu. If you would please stand. who is visiting us today. Well, you're welcome to applaud now if you like. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I would let you all know that he is visiting us today to strengthen the Commonwealth's close relationship with the Republic of Japan. As one of the Commonwealth's strongest international trade allies, Japan is Virginia's second largest source of foreign direct investment, with nearly $1.3 billion invested in the Commonwealth. Japan businesses have created over 2,000 jobs in the Commonwealth, as well as over 10,000 Japanese Americans living in Virginia. Minister Kawazu extends an invitation to members of the General Assembly on behalf of the Ambassador of Japan, Kinichiro Sase, to a reception on April the 7th at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., celebrating the relationship between the Republic of Japan and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I would ask that you give a warm House welcome to Minister Kawazu.
We're honored to have the minister from the embassy, and we appreciate very much your taking the time, and we appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Campbell, Mr. Ferris.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday afternoon, my district, like so many other areas in the state, was struck by tornadoes. I didn't realize how serious it was until the governor's office called me and told me what they'd heard, and I began to investigate. The little community of Evergreen, the governor's there now, was hit extremely hard. In Appomattox County, the schools were put on lockdown and left in all afternoon. I'd really like to praise the heroism of the state police, the Virginia National Guard, VDOT, VDM, the sheriff's office, the rescue squads, Red Cross, the churches. Community really came together last night in Appomattox, and I'm so proud of them. Today, the state champion football team from Appomattox met at the high school, and they're presently clearing roads and cutting trees and cleaning people's yards to get them to their house. My legislative aide went home, changed her clothes, and she's in the community of Concord helping clean a house up so a family can move in it to stay. That family has a child that's at VCU, and they lost everything they own, plus their child was injured. We lost one gentleman in our community, Mr. Harris, and throughout the whole state, I think, is numerous people that lost their lives. We may not know the total number yet, Mr. Speaker. And I know we've done this once today, but I really think it's proper that we adjourn in honor and memory of those that lost their lives throughout the state yesterday with these tornadoes.
Gentleman from Campbell, Mr. Ferris moves that when the House adjourned today, it adjourned in the honor and the memory of all of those who lost their lives in the tornado tragedy yesterday. As many as favor that motion will please rise. That motion is agreed to. Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request.
Let me state it.
Mr. Speaker, on the printed calendar on page 4, if Senate Bill 564 could go to the regular calendar.
Without objection, Senate Bill 564 to the regular calendar. Are there further motions or resolutions under Rule 39? If not, the clerk will call the calendar.
Special and continuing order for the House of Delegates for Thursday, February 25th, calls for the consideration of the two budget bills. On page 9 of the printed calendar, first up is House Bill 29. House Bill 29 is a bill to amend and reenact Chapter 665 of the 2015 Acts of Assembly, which appropriated the public revenues and provided a portion of such revenues for the 2 years ending respectively on the 30th day of June 2015 and the 30th day of June 2016. The bill was reported from the Committee on Appropriations with amendments. Those amendments have been printed separately, are available online and on your desks.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the time is upon us. I would ask that the request that the clerk would report committee amendments for which there are objections.
Clerk will report the objections.
For House Bill 29, there have been 2 objections raised, 2 objections to committee amendments on House Bill 29. First is on page 4. Page 4, item number 290, number 1H. An objection has been raised. Page 4, 290, number 1H. The second objection to House Bill 29 has been on the very end, page 25. Objections have been raised to item 3-6.05, number 1H. Page 25, 3-6.05, number 1H.
Are there further objections? Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, I move that the remaining committee amendments for which there is no objection be agreed to en bloc.
Shall the remaining committee amendments for which there is no objection be agreed to en bloc? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. Those amendments are agreed to. The clerk will now proceed to report those committee amendments for which there was an objection.
Mr. Speaker, page 4, committee amendments for House Bill 29, objections been raised. Page 4 to item 290, number 1H. Page 4 of the committee amendments to House Bill 29, item number 290, number 1H.
Does anyone wish to explain their objection? The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, point of information. I would inquire, I think, just to remind everybody this time of year, is it not right that if one supports the amendment, that they would vote yes, and that if they support the objection, they would vote no?
I'd say that's pretty close.
All right, well, I'm just Mr. Speaker.
I'm glad you told me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the amendment be agreed to?
You need to,
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, just clerk will strike the roll. Gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
A move for a do-over, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, okay.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
The Speaker, a point of information.
Probably asking the wrong guy.
Isn't it true all we're doing now is there's an objection, and so the item is in front of us, and so with the item in front of us, if you like the item in the budget, you vote yes.
I would say so.
Okay, I think where everybody got confused, he wasn't, that's all right. I think where everybody got confused is when we get to the floor amendments, you're sort of in a different posture. But right now, it's only 2 objections to the budget, and so if you like the item, then you would vote yes.
Shall the House will come to order. Shall the amendment be agreed to?
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary
Clerk will destroy that one as well. Gentleman, Charlottesville, Mr.
Mr. Speaker, I've never heard of the motion of do-over, so I'm kind of curious what the nature of that parliamentary move was. And is the vote properly before the body?
Mr. Speaker.
Destroyed the roll on the first vote. And sometime I'll explain to you about do-overs. Shall the amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 65, noes 34.
Ayes 65, noes 34. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, continuing with the objection, the other objection, the final objection to the committee amendment on House Bill 29, page 25. Page 25, the objection was raised for item 3-6.05, number 1H.
The gentleman from Sussex, Ms. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to object to item 3.605, number 1, which strikes the existing language and insert new language requiring all citation for traffic infractions occurring on interstate highway shall be written under the state traffic ordinance. Basically, what this amendment means that all fines for ticket written on interstate highways by the sheriffs or their deputies would go to the state and not to the locality. This amendment is opposed by the Virginia Sheriff Association, local sheriffs, and local governments that have interstate highways going through their district. Local law enforcement efforts along interstate results in criminal charges for those who come in contact with the deputy sheriff enforcing these laws. Based on the recent Sheriff Association survey last year, 75,969 citations were issued on state highways regarding speeding. 130 apprehensions of persons wanted by the police was also apprehended on interstate highways. And there's a lot of other survey stats. But basically, Mr. Speaker, this amendment will have a significant revenue impact on numerous localities, including the city of Emporia, Hopewell, Smith County, Washington County, Wythe County, Carroll counties. Mr. Speaker, our sheriff departments do a good job policing our interstates and helping the state police combat crime. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will create public safety issues as well as an additional revenue hardship on our rural counties and city. I urge the House to reject the committee amendment.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 1:30.
Until 1:30. The
1:30.
Moves that the House stand in recess until 1:30. Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. House stands in recess until 1:30.
The House Republican Caucus will meet immediately upon the recess in House Room 1. The Democratic Caucus will meet immediately upon the recess in House Room 2.
Localities that don't have speed traps on their interstate highways aren't penalized. So I just ask you to be very careful. If you have a locality that's done nothing wrong, then you want to go ahead and vote against the motion to pass by and accept the amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Hopewell, Mr. Ingram.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, no, sir, that's not correct. All the motion says to pass by means that it's not in the budget anymore. So what you want to do is vote to pass it by, and if your locality wants to patrol, they can. They just have to give a portion of it back to the literary fund. If they don't poll, Mr. Speaker, if they do not poll or do not toll, if they do not, oh God. If they do not write tickets on the interstate, you don't have a thing to worry about. Pass it by.
The motion before the body is to pass by the amendment. As many as favor that motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, there were only two objections to those two item numbers on House Bill 29.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I move that the third constitutional reading for House Bill 29 be dispensed.
Shall the third constitutional read of House Bill 29 be dispensed with? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The motion is agreed to. Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The bill is passed. The clerk will call up House Bill 30.
Continuing with the special and continuing order, page 10 of the printed calendar, House Bill 30. House Bill 30 is a bill for all appropriations of the budget submitted by the Governor of Virginia in accordance with the provisions of Section 2.2-1509, the Code of Virginia, and to provide a portion of revenues for the 2 years ending respectively on the 30th day of June 2017 and the 30th day of June 2018. Bill was reported from the Committee on Appropriations with amendments. Those amendments have been printed separately. They're before the body and are online.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House. This afternoon, we take up the Appropriations Committee recommendations to the budget. I'm very gratified that our budget recommendations received a bipartisan and unanimous vote from the committee. As many of you know, crafting the biennial budget for the Commonwealth of Virginia is no easy task, and one that I know the committee undertakes with great interest in doing what is in the best interest of all Virginians. Since the budget was introduced some 10 weeks ago, we have conducted a series of public hearings across the Commonwealth in order to receive input from our citizens onto what their priorities are. Shortly after arriving here 43 days ago, the subcommittee chairman and I got together and started discussing what direction the committee should take. We began our process by fully vetting the introduced budget. Recognizing that the responsibilities of adopting a budget ultimately rest with us, we knew that an integral component of that success was to involve all 100 members of this chamber. So we engaged in our small group briefings, in which each and every member had the opportunity to provide their input, to ask questions of our staff, and to participate in depth in what they would like to see in the budget. With that input, we charted several goals and principles. Mr. Speaker, can I just please ask the members if they could just wait until I'm done if they want to talk. I'm old, I don't hear as well as I used to, and background noise sometimes will confuse me.
The House will come to order.
With the input of the House, we charted several goals and principles that would serve as a framework for the committee's budget deliberations. That first principle, Mr. Speaker, is one that I know is near and dear to your heart, and that is structurally balanced in our approach to budgeting. And this, Mr. Speaker, budget is no different. As required by the Constitution, we include $605.6 million in rainy day fund deposits, replenishing the fund which was used as intended during the past recession. This balance at the end of fiscal year 17 will increase to $843 million. While our state revenues have begun to rebound and they are growing, the historic rate is 6%, and in fact, 16, 17, and 18, we will average 3.3%, which is 0.7% less than what we've averaged the last 15 years. The committee believes that it's imperative to ensure we have adequate cash reserves as we continue to recover from the weakest recoveries in memory. To that end, we will set aside approximately $309.4 million in a reserve fund designed to guard against any further downward revision in the revenue forecast. The reserve fund will serve two purposes. First is a hedge against a downturn in the revenues. Second, if our economy does perform as expected, then we will earmark dollars for state employees, faculty, and state-supported employees for a 3% compensation adjustment in the first year of our budget. In addition, we will set aside $28.2 million, Mr. Speaker, to address recommendations that will come from your Speaker's Workforce Commission in 2018. You may recall that 4 years ago, the General Assembly adopted legislation that put us on a path to fully fund 100% of the rates that were set by the VRS Board of Trustees. The actions contained in this budget, I'm very proud to say, working with each and every one of these members in this chamber, we will be 2 years ahead of schedule at 100% funding of the rate established by VRS for our state and state-supported employees. And next year, the second year of our budget, we will have 100% of the rate for the teachers. That is a monumental accomplishment, in my opinion. And then we weren't satisfied with that, keeping in mind that the theory or the thought of structurally being balanced. We set aside $189.5 million to accelerate the deferral that occurred back in 2010 and 2011. We didn't want to do it at the time. We actually cut funding to K through 12 the first time in memory that anyone could remember. And we have set upon a path since then to fix and take out the gimmicks that we had to use to not to further cut our services back in 2010. Finally, because we were prudent in establishing a collar on non-withholding revenue, last year we recognized the largest surplus in state history because of that approach. This year will be no different. Any dollar above the collared amount will go towards a dollar-for-dollar reduction in the debt that will be authorized in House Bill 1344 once we make our rainy day deposits into Water Quality Improvement Fund deposits. The budget also includes other areas of high priority where the committee did good work. First is the area of public education. All told, the committee budget recommends an additional $897.7 million over the 2-year period compared to the current budget. Of that amount, $272 million will flow back to school divisions from the lottery proceeds fund. You may recall that up until 2010, 40% of that fund was sent back to schools based on a per pupil amount and based on the composite index. But there was a required local match at that point in time. In reestablishing this policy, the subcommittee on education felt very strongly that we should unwind that supplantation of lottery dollars with general fund dollars and send it back with no strings attached as far as a match that is required. Now, keep in mind that prior to 2010, you couldn't use 100% of that money for operating expenses. So there is a 50% requirement of non-recurring cost and a 50% requirement for ongoing cost. Without having a match, this will save our local governments $136.5 million. In total, our schools will get much-needed flexibility to allocate dollars where they think they're best served, and local governments and their citizens, our citizens, get tax relief by not having to match these dollars that come from Richmond. In addition, the committee will provide $83.3 million for a 2% incentive fund to pay for locally approved pay raises for public school employees. Over the years, we have provided flexibility in school divisions in matching these funds, and this year we will allow school divisions who elect to make a pay raise in their first year, they can use those actions towards the requirement in 2018. Another priority investment is continuing our commitment to access and affordability in higher education. I am pleased that this budget will allocate $290 million over the biennium to continue making higher ed a priority. Included in this amount is $127.4 million that is designed to moderate tuition at our colleges and universities by ensuring tuition for a Virginia student will not increase by more than 3% over the biennium. In addition, we will allocate $40 million in cash and $20 million in bonds to fund the collaborative research initiative pursuant to House Bill 1343. I truly believe, and so do members of the committee, that this will be a game changer in the way that Virginia does research. Last year, Mr. Speaker, working collaboratively with the Senate and the governor, we made significant investments in mental health reform. So building on what was accomplished last year, additional funding will be included to expand services under the GAP program to serve individuals up to 80% of the federal poverty level. This will provide coordinated mental health services for an additional 3,600 individuals across the Commonwealth. In addition, we'll add dollars for 2 new PAC teams. Our budget recommendations will also focus additional resources to meet the needs of Virginia's most vulnerable citizens. Specifically, our budget will provide an additional 150 DD waiver slots over the biennium. 2017, 100 of these will be used to take and directed to the top 100 individuals on the local DD waitlist. Another House priority is domestic violence. The House passed a number of bills this session to further combat domestic violence. By passing this legislation, passing this legislation was not enough, so we've included $2 million over the biennium for local domestic violence grants, an additional $3 million in the Department of Housing and Community Development to provide safe, permanent housing solutions. In closing, the budget recommendations that follow will clearly and strategically focus our resources on keeping our promises to fund the core services of government. I believe, quite frankly, the work of the subcommittee have achieved the goals that were set out when we sat down collectively as a body of 100 at the beginning of this session. Speaker, I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to endorse the committee's amendments to House Bill 30.
Clerk will report the objections to the committee amendments.
Mr. Speaker, there are a total of 28 objections to various committee amendments to House Bill 30. They are as follows. Page 2, committee amendments. Objection has been raised to item 1, number 1H. Page 2, objection to item 1, number 1H. Next objection is on page 9. Page 9, objection has been raised to item 33, number 1H. Continuing on to page 33, the next objection on page 33 has been raised for item 106, number 3H. Page 33, item 106, number 3H. Also, on that same page, an objection has been raised to item 106, number 4H. Continuing on to page 37, objection has been raised to item 120, number 1H. Page 37, item 120, number 1H. Continuing forward to page 47. Page 47. Objection to the committee amendment, item number 138, number 3H. Page 47, item 138, number 3H. Also, objection for item 138, number 4H on that same page. Next page, page 48. Objection has been raised to item 138, number 5H. Forwarding on to page 60 of the committee amendments, an objection has been raised on page 60 to item 139, number 15H. Page 60, item 139, number 15H. Then, Mr. Speaker, a significant forwarding to page 118. Page 118 of the committee amendments. An objection on 118 has been raised for item 295, number 1H. Page 118, item 295, number 1H. Next, 2 pages ahead, 120. On page 120, there is a series of objections to all of items 300 and almost all of items. Item 306, number 1H, 2H, 3H, 4H, 5H, 6H. That's on pages 120 to 123. Objections have been raised to items 306, number 1H, 2H, 3H, 4H, 5H, and 6H. Continuing to page 126, the committee amendments, an objection has been raised to item 306, number 11H. Page 126, item 306, number 11H. Next page would be 141. Page 141, an objection has been raised to item 315, number 1H. Page 141, objection to item 315, number 1H. Then another large forwarding over to page 166. Page 166, an objection has been raised to item 388, number 1H. Page 166, an objection to item 388, number 1H. Page 168, an objection has been raised to item 393, number 4H. Page 168, item 393, number 4H, has been objected to. Page 170, objection has been raised to the committee amendment, item number 398, number 2H. Page 170, item 398, number 2H. Go a couple pages ahead to 175. Page 175, objection has been raised on that page to two items, item 424, number 1H, and item 426, number 1H. Page 175, objections to item 424, 1H, and 426, 1H. Forwarding ahead to page 187, objection has been raised on page 187 to item 453, number 2H. 187, item number 453, number 2H. Then a significant forwarding again to page 221. Page 221. An objection has been raised to item 3-6.05, number 1H. Page 221, item 3-6.05, number 1H, been objected to. On page 227, an objection has been raised to item 4-5.04, number 2H. On page 227, objection to 4-5.04, number 2H. The last two objections on page 229, objection has been raised to item 4-9.02, number 1H. Page 229, 4-9.02, number 1H. And the last objection to the committee amendments, page 234. Page 234, an objection has been raised to item 4-14, number 1H. That's the 28 objections have been raised to the committee amendments that have been communicated to the front desk.
Are there further objections? Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, I would move that the remaining committee amendments for which there is no objection be agreed to en bloc.
Shall the remaining committee amendments for which there is no objection be agreed to en bloc? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The motion is agreed to. Shall the bill pass? Or shall the amendments be agreed to?
All right, are we ready to go?
Sorry, we already did that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Clerk will proceed to report the committee amendments for which there was an objection.
Turning to page 2 of the committee amendments to House Bill 30, objections are raised on page 2 to item number 1, number 1H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the person explaining this amendment please take the floor for a question?
Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
That would be me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the gentleman knows that I have a series of questions about some of these items that I may ultimately cast my vote for, but I think it's important enough for the body to know what we're doing here. This is a language amendment that appears to be legislating through the budget. And I guess my question to the gentleman is, why is this particular amendment in here, and why wasn't it a bill that we would have considered instead?
Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman that the Joint Subcommittee to Evaluate Tax Preferences was established, I think, 4 years ago, and that this is not legislating through the budget. There are many things contained throughout the budget that quote unquote give direction. This is continuing part of the work product for that group. I actually sit on this joint subcommittee along with Chairman Ware. We actually discussed it, and Delegate Massey. We discussed this during the session, and I think in us working closer together, the two committees, Finance and Appropriations, felt that this would be a very appropriate direction to give to this entity to look at NAP credits.
Follow-up question, Mr. Speaker?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the gentleman, this committee has been in place since 2012, and I was wondering, given that we haven't heard much from the committee, can you tell us about anything concrete that has been produced from the committee that has led us to some policy change in the Commonwealth?
And I couldn't have given you a better question to ask me. I thank you very much for that question. Well, to answer your question, it hasn't done a whole lot. The only person that's really put anything in, dealing with it, has been myself. We had one that talked about the long-term care tax credits. No one wanted to tackle it, but I put a bill in 2 years ago. We had one dealing with the land preservation tax credits. No one wanted to deal with. I put in last year. So I have been consistent in my chasing good public policy when it comes to how we spend our tax dollars. So I have, and what we hope is that with Delegates Farrell, Massey, Ware, and myself, we're going to get much more focused in the interim, and hopefully coming to a chamber near you soon, you will have a good package of items to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman, and I look forward to the package.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 9 of the committee amendments. Page 9, an objection has been raised to item 33, number 1H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman from Augusta?
Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield to the gentleman's question relating to item 33-1H.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Item 33-1H directs JLARC to study VEDP. And the reason I'm up here asking about this, again, this is not something that I necessarily disagree with, but I thought we passed this in House Joint Resolution 7, and I'm wondering why it is shown up in the budget as additional language here.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to answer the gentleman's question. The gentleman's correct. House Joint Resolution 7, the gentlelady from Bedford, patron, did pass both the House unanimously and the Senate as well. The difficulty arose when JLARC actually came to us, those of us on the Appropriations Committee, and said that they believed they needed to add this language. If you look at the specific language, it gives them the authority to access records related to facilities, employee information and records. Because that was not in the original resolution, they did believe they needed this additional language to make sure they could accomplish what the study was related to VEDP was anticipating. And I hope that answers the gentleman's question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does answer the question.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Excuse me. Ayes 97, noes 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 33 of the committee amendments on House Bill 30, page 33, objection has been raised to item number 106, number 3H. Objection has been raised to item 106, number 3H.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 79, noes 17.
Ayes 79, noes 17. The committee amendment is agreed to.
On that same page, Mr. Speaker, objection has been raised to item 106, number 4H.
Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
I would like to withdraw that objection.
Without objection, the objection is removed. Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, noes 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 37 of the committee amendments, page 37, an objection has been raised to item 120, number 1H. Page 37, 120, number 1H.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to my objection.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I have made this objection, which eliminates, the amendment eliminates $2 million in new funding for development of solar energy in Virginia. It was earmarked to kickstart what is a moribund solar energy industry here in Virginia and try to make us, as we should be, a leader in that industry. And it is money that is necessary to support the Virginia Solar Energy Development Authority. And if we pass this amendment, that authority will have no money to operate with. Now, let me remind the body, we created that authority just last year. 79 of us in this chamber voted for it. There was only one no vote in the Senate. The Speaker has made his appointments, the Senate made its appointments, and they are ready to go. We said to the world last year when we created this authority, and to the marketplace, I might add, we're going to start getting our act together on solar energy. And now, what does this amendment tell the world and the market? It tells us we were just kidding. We're not interested. Last year, we took a baby step forward in the world of solar energy, and now we're going to take 2 steps back. Talk about a missed opportunity. This is really more of a squandered responsibility. This session, we have taken several actions to support and grow industries that are important to us here in the Commonwealth, like our wine industry and our beer industry and data centers. But solar, which is one of the keys to our nation's future, and it's an industry that is growing at a furious clip around the country. Now we're telling the world we're just not interested. We're backing off what we said last year. Last year was just a head fake. You know who's watching us here today, ladies and gentlemen? The Sierra Club, sure. League of Conservation, sure. But let me tell you who's watching us. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Mars, the world's leading companies who have made very clear and very public that they are not interested in doing business in states that aren't interested in solar and other renewable energies. They have been using their considerable influence to tell states, get your act together on solar. And we're about to poke those companies in the eye and take a step backward. Now, we've talked a lot this session about creating jobs. You know who else is watching us? The guy in Southside looking for work since the furniture factory closed. The coal miner looking for a job since coal jobs are dwindling. The woman in Northern Virginia who lost her government contracting position. They are watching and they are wondering today, why does Maryland have twice the number of solar jobs as Virginia? Why does North Carolina have 3 times the number of solar jobs as Virginia? Is their sun any different than ours? No, it's because those states have focused on growing this industry and on catching this solar wave. Those states haven't created and then defunded their programs, which were supposedly meant to move their states forward. We've had enough difficulty here in Virginia, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, making halting baby steps forward on solar energy. Let's not go backward now. I urge you to reject this amendment and vote no.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
I really appreciate the gentleman's passion. Let me just say we have done many things for solar. Delegate Miller had a bill on solar. We looked at this budget amendment, and as it turns out, this was with big government-related buildings, and the actual cost of doing this needed supplemental money. So this is part of the budget process. We got a good budget here that's got more for schools. It's got a lot of things you like. Doesn't have everything you like. So I just hope that, you know, if this cost is coming down, the $1 million will go farther next year. So I hope you'll support the amendment.
The gentleman from Manassas, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to let the ladies and gentlemen know not to worry too much about those great, awesome, high-tech companies that look at each individual state in the union to decide where to do business. Because the bill that we passed this session has some of those exact same businesses that the gentleman from Falls Church mentioned, and they're very excited about what we've just done, and they're now very excited about coming to the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I would urge this body to reject this amendment. No. Accept the amendment, sorry.
Shall the original committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 65, noes 34.
Ayes 65, noes 34. The amendment is agreed to.
From page 37, forwarding ahead to page 40, from 37 to 47. Page 47, an objection has been raised on item number 138, number 3H.
The gentleman from Roanoke City, Mr. Rasul.
Speaking to the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, a lot of good has been done this year. The gentleman from Fairfax, Delegate Albo, saved us from the reign of the British Empire. There's a lot of good in this budget, but I hope we would consider positive behavioral intervention supports, PBIS. So there's $1 million for this evidence-based program that already exists throughout the Commonwealth in 45 different school divisions. The focus here is on classrooms, not courtrooms. In October of 2014, Virginia received a five-year school climate transformation grant from the Department of Education for $3.5 million. And the reason why we won that grant is because of a report that came out that showed that Virginia actually led the nation in student referrals, and that minority students and students with disabilities were more likely than any other students in the nation to be suspended or expelled. So I hope that you'll join me in supporting classrooms, not courtrooms, by rejecting this amendment.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment level funds the positive behavioral intervention and support at almost $600,000 each year, the same as in the fiscal year 2016. The proposed funding in this that we eliminate was an 84% increase and has been repurposed. The money has not gone away. It has been repurposed into the $272 million that will be going to schools through the lottery on a per pupil amount that our localities don't have to match. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I would tell you that the Department of Education has de-emphasized this by reducing their budget almost 50%. In Chapter 665 with respect to this program. So, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the body to adopt the underlying amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 71, noes 28.
Ayes 71, noes 28. The committee amendment is agreed to.
On that same page, on that same page 47, objection has been raised to item 138, number 4H.
The gentleman from Roanoke City, Mr. Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. First, I'd like to thank House Republicans and the House Appropriations Committee for investing and believing in early childhood development. There's a sizable investment in this year's budget. Part of your education agenda that you even outlined earlier this year in a press conference talked about that. Believe it or not, we do listen to what you have to say. But this is about training people to actually teach and help raise our children. Teachers in early childhood centers make very low wages, and they're not really supported here in the Commonwealth through career and professional development. The funding that we're trying to provide would have about upwards of 1,000 new credentials that would be offered in this field. The gentleman from Loudoun, Delegate Greason, even said that there are a stunning rate of 2.5 schools being built each year in his locality and 2,400 additional students. The problem is that there's a severe shortage of well-qualified pre-K instructors. This money will help put people to work, and these are people that are raising our children. So I hope that you will reject the committee amendment.
I'm sorry, the gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. Greason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the comments from the gentleman from Roanoke City. I will tell you, I think this is a prudent amendment that I'd like you all to consider and then ultimately accept. What we're doing here in this amendment is in the introduced budget, if you look at the introduced budget, we're putting $3.35 million in the first year and $4.05 million in the second year. We're using those funds for the Early Childhood Foundation in a couple different ways. One of them is the credentialing program that we just talked about and heard from the gentleman from Roanoke City. They're also very closely tied to House Bills 46 and 47, the committee on early education that will bring stakeholders together over the next year and decide what are the challenges in early education. And the second initiative, House Bill 47, which you all voted for, was the pilot program to learn what's wrong with the early education system and what can we learn from a pilot program. So what you're seeing here, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, is we're reducing money in that first year so that we can actually go and study the problem through House Bill 46 and House Bill 47, come back in the second year and use that money more efficiently. We thought we were putting the cart a little bit before the horse by putting all that money in year one before we answered the questions that are posed in House Bill 46 and House Bill 47. Mr. Speaker, for those reasons, I would ask the body to adopt the original amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 79, noes 21.
Ayes 79, noes 21. The committee amendment is agreed to.
And turning the page on the committee amendments to page 48, an objection has been made to item 138, number 5H.
Gentlewoman from Sussex, Ms. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'm going to let Delegate Kurt Cox save his lovely voice, and I would like to withdraw this objection.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to?
That was fun.
Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 1.
Ayes 99, noes 1. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Moving ahead in the committee amendments to page 60. Page 60, an objection has been raised on page 60 to item 139, number 15H.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Bulova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Let me first begin by saying that I'm proud of the progress we've made on public education this year and very proud to be part of that larger discussion. And I also know and recognize that there are honest differences of opinion about what the scope and scale of parental choice ought to be in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I know that all of us want to have choices for our children, and the question really comes down to ensuring that there's accountability for public tax dollars. I think we can all agree on that. And that all of our children are well prepared for a 21st century economy, and I think we can agree on that as well. If you are one of the 46 individuals in this body who voted against HB 389, which created the Parental Choice Education Savings Account, I hope you'll continue to vote against this amendment. If not, please consider this. First, the purposes for which the money can be expended is extremely broad. It includes transportation, it includes various extracurricular activities, it includes various consumable educational supplies, and a whole host of other items. And it doesn't even have to be spent on K through 12 education. It can actually be saved for public or private colleges or universities. So before you vote on this amendment, please ask yourself, where is the accountability to ensure that the child is actually receiving a quality K through 12 education with our public tax dollars? Second, the administrative burden on local school districts under this amendment could be considerable. Local school districts are responsible for receiving application packages, depositing the funds into a savings account, and receiving, reviewing, and approving receipts and invoices for funds spent on the account. These are no minor tasks. And over the past few years, Mr. Speaker, the General Assembly has made a very concerted effort to avoid unfunded mandates on our schools. And I think that's the right policy to take. If we're going to provide these mandates, we ought to be willing to fund those. This is an administrative burden that will be taken on by our localities that will take local dollars away from our teachers and staff. If we go this route, Mr. Speaker, I also hope that at least we would do so equitably. But that's not what this amendment does. An individual's ability to pay has nothing to do with a locality's ability to pay. And yet the funds are distributed to parents based on the state share for that locality. And so, for example, if you are a struggling parent in Fairfax or Goochland or Surrey, you will only receive in the range of $2,500 to $3,500, while if you are a well-off parent in a low LCI locality, you can receive upwards of $7,000. That's not equitable. Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to make sure everybody recognizes that House Bill 389, on which this amendment is based, specifically allows money to be used for religious schools. This contradicts Article 8, Section 10 of our Constitution, which prohibits funding for sectarian uses. Mr. Speaker, rather than this amendment, I hope that we'll continue the other excellent work in this budget that gives our schools the resources and the flexibilities that they need to succeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. Greason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Fairfax, who's one of the more thoughtful members on education issues and usually comes to a debate well prepared with the right facts. I just wanted to point out a few things, Mr. Speaker, on this particular amendment. The gentleman talked about purposes of the money and the ability for a parent to educate their child. He talked about the administrative burden on the localities. Just remember, the locality is keeping 100% of the local dollars when this account is set up. He did talk about the LCI inequities. Probably could agree on LCI inequities on a number of different occasions. And Mr. Speaker, lastly, he talked about religious schools and whether or not this does or doesn't run afoul with the Constitution. I think the point of this amendment, however, though, is we've passed this bill, and this amendment is therefore required to actually put the mechanisms in place. You may disagree with the underlying components of House Bill 389, but if we don't pass this amendment, the mechanics of setting it up will disappear, and that is just bad governing. So I would ask the body to adopt the original amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 57, noes 41.
Ayes 57, noes 41. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Continuing forward on a number of pages, all the way up to page 118. Page 118, an objection has been raised on page 118 of the committee amendments for item 295, number 1H.
Shall the amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 67, noes 31.
Ayes 67, noes 31. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, turning 2 pages forward to page 120, the beginning of a series of objections in this section. Objection has been raised on page 120 to item 306, number 1H.
The gentleman of Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the objection or the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is one of a series of amendments that are related to this topic. And I think if you listened yesterday to what we had to say on the floor, and a lot of what's been said so far today, there's no doubt that there's a lot of good things in this budget. At the same time, there are a lot of missed opportunities. And of all the missed opportunities in this budget, this is the biggest one. And let me tell you why. So if you look on page 120 at item 306, 1H, it tells you the story of the financial impact of not accepting Medicaid expansion. You can see in fiscal year 16 to 17, we had to put $38 million in the budget, and in 17-18 we had to put $46 million in the budget, and you see those letters there. It says GF, and all of us know that that means general fund. That means our taxpayer dollars that come into the Treasury and get allocated through the appropriations process. If you look below that, however, and you see the changes, you see in the first year, there's the elimination of $707 million. And in the second year, there's the elimination of $2.297 billion. And then it says, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, NGF. That means non-general fund. So that shows you the financial implications, because the non-general fund is money, while it is ours, is coming back to us via Washington, D.C., as opposed to going somewhere else. And that's the grand missed opportunity in this budget. We've talked in the past about how this is our money, and we would like it back. And we would like it back to help people all over the state who don't have insurance now, between 240,000 and 400,000 people. We'd like it back because it'll be a job creator, 30,000 jobs. We'd like it back in order to free up money in the budget that is otherwise being spent because we're not taking on Medicaid expansion. The governor in his budget booked $157 million in savings because he built Medicaid expansion into his budget. And he had a way to fix any concerns that people had about the long-term impact of possibly the federal government not living up to their side of the bargain. So this is the grand missed opportunity, Mr. Speaker. And this is an amendment that we should all vote no on to say that we're not going to kick this opportunity away. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, item 306, number 1H, is the first of a number of amendments you'll see related to Medicaid and Medicaid expansion that the governor included in his budget. This amendment simply restores the general funds for the Medicaid program that and eliminates the federal funds based on what the governor proposed under expansion of Medicaid under the ACA. This is a companion amendment to items 315, 343, and 477, which unwind Medicaid expansion. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, let me talk to you about why we've done this in the budget and why we believe from the Appropriations Committee standpoint, as we've had this debate in the past, why we do not want to take Virginia down the road that many other states have gone. First of all, as the chairman said, sometimes you just get handed things that you just can't help use when other states have made this mistake and are unfortunately seeing the impact on their budgets, and it's not in a positive way. I've mentioned on this floor Michigan, Ohio, and the challenges that they're having. And this isn't always a partisan issue. I know there's some Republicans and some Republican governors who've expanded. I think they're just wrong. And in the case of one of the gentlemen that's running for president of the United States, his state has shown a tremendous increase above and beyond what the estimates were in a negative impact on their state budget. That's not what we're about in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The chairman has said clearly, and we've stated a number of times on this floor, we're going to have a conservative, structurally balanced, and a targeted budget when it comes to helping the citizens of the Commonwealth. In Kentucky, this is the article that we just received. Kentucky's Medicaid program faces a $611 million shortfall. That's over $500 million, and that's at 90% where Medicaid expansion is for the reimbursement under the ACA currently. We've made additional investments, even with Medicaid expansion, out of the budget in this budget. And we did it in a fiscally responsible way, over $28 million in helping people through the health safety net in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, the gentleman from Charlottesville and I just have to agree to disagree on this issue because it's not fiscally prudent to put in an expanded program that in other states is showing tremendous increase, negative impact on their budget. And if we were to go down that same path, we would have to go to our citizens and ask them for additional resources. That means tax increases, or we would have to cut our budget in other areas. One of the things that we were able to do in this budget is expand and increase what the governor did, over $70 million for public education. One of those things that both sides of the aisle agree is of paramount importance to our citizens. If we expanded Medicaid, that's not the kind of thing we'd be able to do in the future, because as our Medicaid budget currently continues to expand, it consumes more and more of our budget. So those are the reasons that we do not need to expand and why we have these amendments in our budget. And I hope the House will support this amendment and the other amendments that we'll see related to Medicaid expansion.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 66, noes 34.
Ayes 66, noes 34. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Continuing on that same page, 120, objection has been raised to the committee amendment item 306, number 2H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, would the person explaining this amendment rise for a question?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon. Does he yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman if he could explain what this amendment does.
Yes, sir. The long-term care facilities through DMAS go through a rebasing process. DMAS last year changed the rules in mid-cycle and did not, it resulted in this amount not being provided to them as part of the process. This just simply squares them up and says that they will need to move forward under the rules that had been established before Medicaid changed the rules.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, it talks about nursing facility. I'm assuming that this makes up for some maybe deficiency that they're getting in reimbursements under Medicaid. Do I have that right?
So I would say to the gentleman that the facilities have a process in place with an inflation adjustment, which is done every 3 years, I think. And this Medicaid changed the rules on them in mid-cycle, and this simply corrects that.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the gentleman, if I look here at the amendment, it says $5.5 million in general funds and $5.5 million in non-general funds. Can the gentleman explain to me what that means?
Yes, sir. That's the Medicaid 50-50 match, I think, that exists in Virginia.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking briefly to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope you will support this amendment. It's a good amendment. It does cost money, but we know that nursing facilities can benefit by that money. However we get it to them, I hope you'll support the amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 121, the next page, objection has been raised to item 306, number 3H.
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Will the gentleman yield for a question? Will whoever is handling this yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield to the gentleman from Charlottesville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, this is the amendment related to so-called gap funding for the seriously mentally ill, is that right?
Mr. Speaker, to answer the gentleman, that is correct.
Okay. Will the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the
Mr.
gentleman
Speaker,
yield?
I'd be glad to yield.
Gentleman.
And is this, I'd ask the gentleman, is this the program that got started last year and we targeted at 60% of the poverty line to try to help some folks who really could use some assistance with Medicaid funding? Is that where this got started last year?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman, that is correct.
Follow-up question, Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield.
Gentleman's still glad.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the gentleman, this looks like a one-to-one match where the state puts up $1 and the feds put up $1 to accomplish this goal. Isn't it the case that if we had expanded Medicaid, we would have gotten for every dollar we put up, maybe $9 or $10, depending on what the ratio is? Certainly a lot more than one-to-one. Would that be true?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman, as he knows, for Virginia, we do have the 50-50 match. With the expansion, it is possible that we would have gotten the ratio that gentleman's speaking, but I do not know that for sure.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this is another one of those missed opportunities. This is a good amendment. I'm going to support this amendment. I encourage people to vote for this amendment. This is a wonderful way to provide some people with an additional level of care that will really help them. The problem is that we're paying for it in the wrong way. If we'd expanded Medicaid, for every dollar we would have put in the program, we could have either gotten $9 back or $10 back, or I'm sorry, it's not quite that way. For every dollar we put into the program, we would have gotten more than the $1 from the feds to fund the program. So this would have been a better way to do it if we had accepted Medicaid. I support the amendment, but I hope that you will think about long-term the possibility of expanding Medicaid so we can deliver this service much more efficiently.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 122, the next page. Objection has been raised to item 306, number 4H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Will the person explaining this rise for a question?
Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield to the gentleman from Charlottesville.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's the gentleman. This is the IDDD support waivers that we've continued to try to grow every time in the budget. And I guess I'd ask the gentleman, what's the status of the waiting list now for the IDDD waivers?
Mr. Speaker, I'd answer the gentleman that he is correct. This is our attempt as the transition goes forward to provide additional waiver slots above and beyond what the governor included based on the DOJ agreement and past actions. I would say to the gentleman that the waiting list, depending on who you talk to, is, I believe, around 10,000.
Okay. Will the gentleman yield for another question?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, to ask the gentleman, we have 150. Is that some kind of legal requirement that we have 150 this year, or we just came up with that number because that's what we thought we could afford?
Mr. Speaker, I'd answer the gentleman that this is in addition to what the governor and what is required by the DOJ settlement. So this is above. We believed it was important enough and the chairman was good enough to provide the resources for additional slots. I would say to the gentleman, as he knows, I believe this is a high priority. As the chairman knows, I would have liked to see more, but it's a matter of what we can afford. And with the priority of education and other areas of the health safety net, that $28 million I mentioned, this was what we could afford at this time. I do think, though, Mr. Speaker, that in talking to the chairman and other members, this is also because we believe we also need to wait and see how the transition goes to make sure those waiver slots and the new configuration, if you will, we didn't want to go too quickly, too fast. So the 150 should help, but we also have to monitor and see how that's going. And I'm hopeful that if the revenues bear out in the next couple years, we'll be able to do even more and reduce, as I think the gentleman would agree, the waiting list, and especially the critical care of the folks that need it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, again, this is another amendment that I think we should support. It's been a priority, I think, of both sides of the aisle to increase the IDDD waivers. And even if we took Medicaid expansion, we would probably have to do it this way on a one-to-one match. But here's the missed opportunity. $157 million in savings that the governor booked in his budget. Those savings were taken away when you don't take Medicaid. You could have had more waivers here by taking a portion of that $157 million in savings. So while I support this amendment, I think everybody should vote for it because it's really a good thing. We should recognize that we might have been able to do more. It's a missed opportunity. Vote yes, and let's do more.
Shall the committee amendment?
Speaker, the gentleman yield for a question.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
I'll yield.
The gentleman explained to me that in the governor's budget why he didn't put more waiver slots in his budget.
Mr. Speaker, I'd respond to the gentleman that I was not privy to what decisions the governor, what went on when he made the decisions about this. But I can tell you this, I know it's a priority of yours. I know it's a priority of everybody in this chamber. And if it's a priority, we should put more in there, not just 150. Then it's a question of money. And because we kicked out $157 million, we don't have the money. That makes sense to me. And maybe if we had more money next year, the governor will put more money in his revised budget, and we can vote for more waivers next year. Thank you.
Shall the budget amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, noes 0. The budget amendment is agreed to.
Continuing on that same page, 122 of the committee amendments, objection has been raised to item 306, number 5H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that you'll support this fine amendment, and because I think nursing homes can use that increase in their payment rate, even though that payment rate is simply a one-to-one match. It's a good thing. I hope you'll support the amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, noes 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
And Mr. Speaker, turning to page 123 of the committee amendments, objection has been raised to item 306, number 6H.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is another one of those very fine amendments I hope we can support.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, noes 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Okay. Turning to page 126 of the committee amendments. Page 126, objection has been raised to item 306, number 11H.
Will the gentleman from Augusta yield for a question?
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman from Augusta yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield to the gentleman from Charlottesville.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman, this is the Medicaid reform language that I think has shown up in previous budgets, is it not?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman that this is the amendment that restores Medicaid reform language, and that was not included in the introduced budget.
Right. Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I would be glad to yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the gentleman has worked for a number of years on this Medicaid reform issue, and I know that there are a number of reforms that have been put into place. Can the gentleman tell us or give us an update on the status of the reforms as he knows that?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the gentleman that that is a difficult question to answer because, as he knows, originally we had set up in the budget, and then it was codified, the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission. The commission met for 1 year. I was actually vice chairman of that. Senator Hanger, now the co-chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, was the chairman. We had 5 members from the House and 5 members from the Senate. 2 members that were representing the Governor's Cabinet, the Secretary of Finance, the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. And lo and behold, soon after we met for a year, His Excellency determined that his executive branch secretaries and the Department of Medical Assistance Services were no longer to cooperate with the Commission, and we have not met. So we have gotten intermittent updates on reforms, and some of them are working and have shown additional savings, and we have obviously programmed that back into additional reforms and efforts in our Medicaid budget. But I cannot give him specifics at this point. I'd be glad if he would ask the Secretary and the Director of the Department of Medical Assistance Services if they could provide those. We'd be glad to further discuss those.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield.
The gentleman's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman, if I remember the old Merck language, it had some provisions about some statements to the effect, I think, that if the reforms were satisfactory to the Merck, then the Merck could go ahead and embrace Medicaid expansion. Now, some people raised questions about whether that was constitutional or not, but there was language like that. That language is not in here anymore. Is that right?
Mr. Speaker, I believe the language is included later on in the budget. We haven't gotten this dealt with specifically related to the reform language, but I'd remind the gentleman that the majority of both the House members and the Senate members had to agree that the reforms had been completed and that Medicaid expansion should move forward.
I thank the gentleman.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 93, noes 7.
Ayes 93, no 7. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Moving ahead to page 141 of the committee amendments, page 141, an objection has been raised to item 315, number 1H.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Skipping ahead to page 166. 166, page 166, an objection has been raised to committee amendment item number 388, number 1H.
Gentleman Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment, or speaking to the objection. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, we have a problem in Virginia with mental illness and with our prison system. In Virginia, there's a 2015 study from the Compensation Board found we had over 7,000 of our incarcerated individuals in Virginia in regional local jails were suffering from mental illness. That's 1 in 4 prisoners in our prisons are suffering from some form of mental illness. This amendment removes funding totaling $2.2 million from the general fund each year and 11 positions for mental health services and probation and parole officers. Because the other problem we have is that these folks suffering from mental illness in prisons and jails are not being treated. And they get out, and their underlying mental illness that caused the criminal activity that got them into jail in the first place is not being treated. And so they come out, they maybe are served a portion of a sentence, they have a suspended portion of the sentence, and the probation officers that are dealing with them aren't equipped to deal with their underlying mental health problems. And so what ends up happening is they end up reviolating. And they end up back in prison, and we have a revolving door that happens. You know, we in Fairfax are about to interview a bunch of new juvenile domestic relations court judges. I had one in my office this morning, an experienced judge who'd done some substitute judging, and told me about a case that had happened to him just last week. He had a person before him who had violated probation. He had a suspended sentence of 365 days. The guy was bipolar. He had gone off his meds. He'd violated his probation. He was back in front of that judge. He had gotten back on his medication. He was back getting the treatment he wanted, but the probation officer was recommending that he go to jail. Okay, that's not the right answer. And the judge said that's not the right answer. Why is this person back in front of me? This person isn't bad. This person is sick. This person needs help. This person needs to be directed to the proper services so they can be treated. They don't belong in prison. And this language, removing $4.4 million over the next 2 years to equip those probation officers and parole officers to catch those cases, understand the difference between people that need to be in jail and those that don't. Taking that out is a real missed opportunity, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. And I know why this money is going away. It's going away because the next objection that I've got is because we're going to need to put much more money into regular medical services for people in our prisons and jails because they are not eligible for Medicaid and because we haven't expanded Medicaid. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I would hope that it would be the pleasure of the House to reject this amendment.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to accept the amendment. This money was essentially repurposed to address an almost 500 person shortfall in the Department of Corrections that really needs to be addressed. The committee, in doing so, is taking $3 million and adding an additional 53 prison guards to what the underlying budget did. So now we will have a total of 89. If you go to the next page, you'll see in the budget where we have actually inserted those 53. And that's almost, I might add, a 20% increase in the number of correctional officers that we now will have at work in Virginia. And if you have correctional officers in your district, believe me, this is a bill, this is an amendment you want to support. Expanding the mental health services through existing programs was done with the expansion of eligibility in the GAP program that we just discussed. And when the DOC came before our subcommittee, I'd say to those concerned about this amendment that the DOC wasn't even aware of the GAP program. And so the GAP program may well be used to address some of the issues that the gentleman brought up, but I guess you have to actually work inside that program in order to do it. I would hope that you support the amendment.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Speaking to the amendment briefly.
Gentleman has the floor.
I hope you'll support the amendment. Delegate Lingenfelter clearly defined that. We took basically the whole package in the administration's proposals for the gap funding in the mental health and substance abuse services. And it also reminds you on page 130, we have specific language in another part of the budget for us to do an outreach to DOC and local jails, because this issue is important to all of us. So yes, it's tough prioritization, but we're all very focused on this issue. I think it is addressed in the budget, and I hope you'll support the budget amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 73, noes 26.
Ayes 73, noes 26. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Moving ahead 2 more pages to page 168, committee amendments. Objection has been raised on page 168 to item 393, number 4H.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is, again, another example of the real missed opportunity that we've had from not expanding Medicaid. And let me read the explanation for this amendment. This amendment restores funding for inpatient hospital services for inmates removed from the Department of Corrections into the introduced budgets related to the assumed savings of Medicaid expansion. All right? So we can talk about, well, this money's being used for more corrections officers over here, it's being used over here. And I guess the dollars are fungible, but to me, it sure looks like we're taking the $30 million that we had to plow back in to prison health care, and we're getting some of that money from the mental health services that we're not going to provide through the probation offices. We're getting some of it from the next objection, which will be from mental health pilot programs. But let me explain how this works. We talk about how in Kentucky their program is hemorrhaging money. And we worry that if we expand Medicaid here in Virginia, we might also have to pay more money than we expected. But this is money that we know. This is money that we know we are spending because we are not expanding Medicaid, because we're afraid there might be a match down the road that we won't be able to afford. Well, this is $33 million of Virginia taxpayer money that we're spending on health care for people in our prisons and jails that would otherwise qualify for Medicaid. The way that works is Medicaid says you can use Medicaid to fund health care for prisoners if they would otherwise qualify under your state's program. Because our eligibility requirements are so tight, very few of our prisoners actually qualify, and so we have to put 100%. It's not a 50-50 match. It's not a 90-10 match. We have to put 100% Virginia taxpayer dollars to pay for the health care for these prisoners because we refuse to expand Medicaid. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to reject the amendment, to accept. Well, we've got to accept it. Look, the fact is, as much as I wish we could reject this money, as much as I wish we could reject this amendment, the fact is we're stuck having to pay this money because we missed the opportunity to expand Medicaid. So unfortunately, I think we ought to accept this amendment, but I wish it weren't necessary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning ahead 2 pages to 170 of the committee amendments, an objection on page 170 has been raised to item 398, number 2H.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, this is the last of these amendments that I want to get to, but I want to explain what my objection is here. And this one's pretty important. Mr. Speaker, we've got $2.5 million each year of the biennium being taken out of the budget. This is money that was going to be used to establish some mental health pilot programs in local regional jails and to solicit proposals for pilot programs to improve mental health inside of our jails and prisons. And I explained already that 1 in 4 of our inmates are suffering from serious mental illness, but a jail is not a place to receive treatment. It's not the right place. They're not equipped to do it. Now, what this bill does, what this language does, there's language to this amendment as well as taking the money away. It says, go ahead and do the study. Go ahead and develop the programs, but we're not going to pay for them yet. All right, but go develop a program and report back to us by August 15th, 2016, and we'll decide which programs are going to work. We don't have money for it yet, but we think it's important. We want to develop a program, and we'll get it implemented soon enough. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the date we picked is August 15th, 2016. I remember last summer what I was doing in August of 2015. I was on vacation with my family. I also remember reading headlines in the Washington Post about a young man who was in the Hampton Regional Jail waiting for a bed because he had been deemed incompetent to stand trial. He'd been ordered for a competency hearing. He was stuck in prison, wasting away without any services for the crime of allegedly, we never know what he did or not, we never get to a trial, but for allegedly stealing a Mountain Dew, a Snickers bar, and a zebra cake worth $5.05. Other inmates said that they saw him pacing naked in a cell, often covered in his own filth. He was in jail, Mr. Speaker, in April. By August 19th, he was dead. He sat in jail, a jail that wasn't equipped to deal with his mental health problems, wasn't equipped to take care of him, recognize that he was in crisis, get him the services that he needed to get well. So this 24-year-old, on August 19th, 2015, essentially was found dead in his cell. He lost 40 pounds. He had just been allowed to waste away. Mr. Speaker, we can't afford, I know we talked about what we can afford, what we can't afford with Medicaid expansion. We can't afford to let those dollars go away. We can't afford to let more people suffer that fate. The last report I got from DBDHS is there are still 35 people as of October of this year sitting in prisons awaiting a bed and waiting evaluations. We can do better than that, Mr. Speaker. I would urge the body to reject this amendment and put that money into the budget. Let's start spending it right away.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelder.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I encourage the House to accept this amendment. Let me just remind you what we're doing here. Yes, we did remove the $2.5 million each year for up to 6 pilot programs that was proposed in the original budget. But the introduced budget did not identify the pilot sites. The introduced budget did not specify the criteria for the sites. The introduced budget did not identify actual funding needed for such pilot programs. And without this information, it's very difficult for committees to assess whether the funding proposed to these pilot sites is necessary and sufficient. It's not responsible budgeting. And so if you take a look at the language, what you'll see is the language in this amendment directs the DCJS and DBHDS to solicit proposals from local and regional jails for mental health pilot programs in local jails. We're not disputing the fact that we need to do this. It needs to be done in a responsible manner. And DCJS is also, in this language, required to provide a report recommending up to 3 pilot sites, a budget for each pilot program, and the mix of state and local funds to be used to fund that pilot program. So look, I would say to the folks here listening to this debate, this is a good amendment, and on top of that, it's responsible budgeting. It doesn't put the cart before the horse, and so I hope that you will accept the amendment.
Shall the committee amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 73, noes 26.
Ayes 73, noes 26. The committee amendments are agreed to.
Moving ahead 5 pages to page 175. Objection has been raised on page 175 to item 424, number 1H of the committee amendments.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment strips about $380,000 out of the budget for positions at the Virginia State Police for them to handle the process of processing restoration of rights applications, and there's been an increase in that process, and so they need more money in order to do it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is yet another missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity to bring more members of our society back into the political process, to expand participation in Virginia's public discourse. Restoring voting rights for people who have paid their debt to society already is not a partisan issue. In fact, it's an issue that both Governors McDonnell and McAuliffe have correctly made a priority in their respective administrations. Virginia is one of only 11 states that either bar citizens with prior felony convictions from voting permanently or require the state to provide an exemption on an individualized basis. I will tell you that roughly 7% of the total voting age population in Virginia is disenfranchised. And we know, unfortunately, that felony disenfranchisement disproportionately affects the African American community. Listen to this number. Over 20% of the voting-aged African American population in Virginia is disenfranchised. 20%. The McAuliffe administration has already made great strides in addressing this. As of today, the administration has restored the rights of over 16,000 individuals, which is more than the past 4 governors combined. The demand is high. But since the governor's policy changed last June, where he removed payment of court costs as a requirement, and just as an aside, by the way, of course that change makes sense. As our Secretary of Commonwealth once pointed out, why should a person with a $25,000 tax lien be allowed to vote, but someone who owes $500 in court costs not be allowed to vote? But since that policy changed, the monthly average of applications has risen from 600 to over 1,000 applications. And additionally, on a monthly basis, DOC tells the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office about people who have been released and are currently eligible, and that adds another 1,000 names to the list. So the workload has increased dramatically. And despite that progress, the administration's over 16,000 restorations account still for less than 5% of Virginians who have lost their right to vote. There's a lot more work left to be done to let individuals know how to access this process. This budget amendment seeks to slow that process, to keep people from voting. It takes money out of this important program. Ladies and gentlemen, for over a century, Virginia has required felons to pay their debt to society before they can be re-enfranchised. But once they have satisfied that debt, the least we can do, the fair thing to do, is to restore funding in this budget to help these folks get access to the foundation of American democracy, the ballot. I urge the body to reject this amendment and vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment has nothing to do with denying people the right to vote or the restoration of the right to vote. This amendment is repurposing money to other priorities that the Virginia State Police have told us, frankly speaking, are high priority for them. And the truth is, they also told our subcommittee that they can accomplish the purpose of this amendment with their current FTE. You know, this committee worked very hard to try to pull the money together that we need to do to address state police salaries and pay compression and things of this nature. And frankly speaking, that's a higher priority, particularly with a task that can be accomplished with their current manpower. And that's what they've told us. So I would encourage you to accept the amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 67, noes 32.
Ayes 67, noes 32. The committee amendment's agreed to.
And on that same page, 175, an objection has been raised to item 426, number 1H.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 92, noes 7.
Ayes 92, noes 7. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Turning to page 187. 187, an objection has been raised to the committee amendment item 453, number 2H. Page 187, item 453, number 2H.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 93, noes 6.
Ayes 93, noes 6. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Moving ahead to page 221. Page 221, an objection has been raised to item 3-6.05, number 1H.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Rock.
I move to pass by the amendment.
Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to.
Continuing with objections on page 227. Is this the... Mr. Speaker, there is an objection on page 227 to item 4-5.04, number 2H. Mr. Speaker, in addition, there are two floor amendments offered by the delegate, by a gentleman from Prince William, Delegate Marshall, that are in conflict. So you have the committee amendment. You also have an amendment by Delegate Marshall, item 4-5.04, number 5H, and item 4-5.04, number 6H.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall, has offered a floor amendment, which is broader in scope than the committee amendment. And so we will take up the floor amendment first.
Mr. Speaker,
Caroline, Ms. Rock.
I move to pass by floor amendment item 4-5.04, number 5H.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Prince William, Ms.
I'd
Mark.
like to claim my 2 minutes to oppose that motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the civil rights movement back in the 1950s and 60s never compromised with their basic principles. There never was, at least publicly, an effort by Rosa Parks or Dr. King or anybody else to say that some African Americans can ride anywhere on the bus, but other African Americans have to ride in the back of the bus. And because of that firm adherence to principles of equality before the law, they eventually succeeded with the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1968 Civil Rights Act. Mr. Speaker, additionally, I'd like to reference the second inaugural address of President Lincoln. He says, "The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh." Now, Mr. Speaker, what are we going to do if, in fact, we adopt this amendment, which in fact allows for wide open abortion funding? This is not my opinion. This is the judgment of the Supreme Court in Doe versus Bolton, 1973, the companion case to Roe versus Wade. Georgia had a statute very similar to Virginia, which allowed abortion for the continuation of the pregnancy if it would seriously and permanently injure her health, or the fetus would very likely be born with a grave, permanent, and irremediable mental or physical defect. Indeed, whether a particular operation is necessary for a patient's physical or mental health is a judgment that physicians are obviously called upon to make routinely. We agree that the medical judgment may be exercised in the light of all factors, physical, emotional, psychological, familiar, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being. All these factors may relate to health. Mr. Speaker, Chief Justice Berger issued a concurring opinion in which he said the word health should be interpreted in the broadest sense as per United States versus Vuitch, a 1971 case. Mr. Justice Douglas issued a concurring opinion in which he held that health should be interpreted very broadly. Yeah, Mr. Speaker? Yes.
I believe the 2 minutes are about up. And
Then tell me when that happens, please, okay?
It's about to happen. Finish the sentence.
Well, some people want me to go beyond that for other reasons, Mr. Speaker.
The question is on the motion to pass by the floor amendment to the committee amendment. As many as favor that motion to pass by the floor amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Many as favor that motion, please raise the right hand. I think that's enough. The floor amendment fails. Now we have an objection to the committee amendment.
On the committee, right, you're on the committee amendment now.
The gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, if this amendment passes, then state funding would not be able to be used for abortions in the case of a gross fetal abnormality. These are decisions that are not made lightly. Usually, these are pregnancies that were very much wanted, in some cases desperately wanted. I want to tell you very quickly one such story. It was a couple who had just suffered a miscarriage of their second child, their second child was stillborn because of an umbilical cord accident. But she very quickly got pregnant again. One of her ultrasounds showed that the fetus's spine was deformed, that it was pulling down the back of the brain, causing hydrocephalus and brain damage. The fetus was not capable of moving its legs because they were stuck in an upright position. Lung tissue was deformed, and the doctors didn't think that the lungs would function. This family got a second opinion and a third opinion. And they were left with the decision of continuing the pregnancy to term, having a C-section delivery, only to have the baby suffocate when the umbilical cord was cut. This family, both the husband and the wife, were federal government employees, so their health insurance wouldn't cover the abortion. At first, they didn't think that was a big deal because they had the money to pay out of pocket. With this amendment, for our poorest citizens, they would have to pay out of pocket because Medicaid would not cover that procedure. If they have health insurance out of the exchange, they wouldn't have coverage for that procedure. And the impact of that is threefold. If that family can't pay out of pocket, and the costs of these procedures range from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on whether you go to a clinic without anesthesia or a private practice with. Hospitals won't accept you to perform this procedure because if your insurance won't cover it, they consider you uninsured. If you can't raise that money right away and you wait until you can, and you have the procedure later in the pregnancy, you have an increase of an adverse outcome for the mother. These are very difficult decisions that none of us would ever want to find ourselves in a position to make. But they shouldn't have to make these decisions. The factor of whether they have the money to pay for it, the factor of whether they have to do this outside of a hospital setting should not be part of the decision. That family should be left to talk to each other, their doctor, and their God to decide what is best. And that's why I object to this amendment and ask you to vote no.
Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Addressing the amendment?
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I would turn the gentlelady's attention to the decision in Doe versus Bolton when Mr. Justice Blackmun says the Georgia law allowed abortion for a continuation of pregnancy which would seriously and permanently injure her health, or the fetus would very likely be born with a grave, permanent, and irremediable mental or physical defect. Now, I don't agree that we should fund one abortion or that one abortion should take place in Virginia because all lives should be considered sacred. And like Lincoln said, yes, evil must happen, but woe to those through whom it comes. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know there are some groups in Virginia that are giving some politicians a pass to vote for this provision here, but it won't erase the fact that many of the Right to Life people who hope to restore respect for life and certainly not use tax money to kill children before birth, these are the very ones that put a number of you here in public office. Mr. Speaker, I can't speak for anybody else, their conscience. I intend to vote present because I won't vote for something that I know will authorize abortion on demand, in which I fully expect this Attorney General to issue an opinion to some member of this body who is requesting what can be funded under this, and frankly, he'll be correct, and he'll cite Doe versus Bolton. I disagree with that, but he can correctly cite Doe versus Bolton for wide open abortion on demand. I urge a vote present. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment has been in the House budget since, or proposed by this House since 2013. It simply puts back in the language that has been there related to this issue that was deleted by the governor in Chapter 665 So I hope the House will pass the amendment.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 64, noes 34.
Ayes 64, noes 34. The amendment is agreed to.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, the other amendment offered by Delegate Marshall of Prince William, number 6H, is not properly before us because the committee amendment, the adoption of the committee makes it moot.
Excuse me.
So continuing on with objections, turning to page 229. 229, an objection has been raised to item 4-9.02, number 1H.
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman from Colonial Heights be willing to explain what this language in the budget means?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I would be glad to. This is some pilot language that deals with JMU and George Mason to allow them somewhat greater autonomy. This is a request of both of them. This really is not new authority in the code. Basically, if you remember, what autonomy currently these two institutions have is they have it already in the area of procurement and information technology. They can ask now for that authority in capital outlay. What this basically allows them under this pilot to go ahead and have that authority. A lot of the other language is pulled from other parts of the budget. Some of it obviously does things like makes it easy as far as things like faculty travel. Currently, for these two institutions, they have to go to the Secretary of Education just to get a faculty travel permission to go to any kind of conference, et cetera. So sort of an accumulation of that. And so that's basically what it does.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
I yield.
Gentleman yield. Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the gentleman, and I had supported the concept of autonomy for universities. And remember, I don't know how many years ago, but that we spent a fair bit of time dealing with the autonomy issue related to UVA Tech and William and Mary. And it went through the legislative process. Now, admittedly, this is a pilot project, but it's a pretty substantial change. So can the gentleman explain to me why this wasn't a bill and instead went through the appropriations process?
I think I already explained that. I said basically, if you look at code, this really does nothing new. It basically gives a lot of these institutions some powers they already have through their MOUs, and the big change in it is currently there are 3 powers your level 1s have. Your level 2, like Madison and GMU, already have procurement information technology, and it allows them, as far as the capital outlay now, to do that. Now, there's a path for them to already do all of this. We thought these institutions were further along, so it's fairly limited. And like I said, if you look at a lot of the other language, it's sort of restating a lot of the MOU language.
Thank the gentleman.
Shall the budget amendment be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 2.
Ayes 97, noes 2. The budget amendment is agreed to.
And Mr. Speaker, the last objection is on page 234 to the committee amendments. Objection has been raised. Committee amendment item 4-14, number 1H.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to?
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
I'd like to address it.
Should have pushed your button, huh?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Gentleman has floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have no problems with, quote, legislation in an appropriations bill because this is the premier instrument by which this body can affect public policy, and those are not my words, those are from James Madison. But this is unusual in its length, 29 pages. And I have an amendment at some point which I hope to offer to modify this. So just for purposes of procedure, Mr. Speaker, would this have to be approved so that I could then offer my amendment?
Your amendment is drawn to this amendment, I would say so.
So we will so I won't vote yes because I don't want to be tainted. But I'll offer that at the appropriate time.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
Shall the committee amendment be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 89, noes 10.
Ayes 89, noes 10. The committee amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, having completed the uncontested block, the objected amendments to the committee, now we have floor amendments which were not in conflict with any of the committee amendments. A number of them have been withdrawn. So the first floor amendment is offered by Delegate Bell to item 132, number 2H. Delegate Bell.
The gentleman, Mr. Bell,
Mr. Speaker, I would ask to withdraw that amendment.
without objection, that amendment will be withdrawn.
Continuing with floor amendments, the next one that has not been withdrawn, that is before the body, Delegate Campbell has an amendment, item 319, number 1H.
Gentleman with Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would be moving to withdraw that amendment, but before I do, I would like to say thank you to the Speaker and to the Majority Leader for their warm and engaging visit that I had this morning. I think we need to do that more often, quite frankly.
I've tried it on the other side. They never listened to
It
me.
doesn't work. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, this issue, as the Speaker certainly knows, is very important to my district. And I really appreciate the commitment of you and the Majority Leader to encourage the House Appropriations Committee to take a much closer look at this issue in the coming year and perhaps even make a visit to the area. This is awfully important to our district. We are dealing with some of our most vulnerable citizens out there. And again, I appreciate that commitment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Smith has withdrawn his amendment.
So continuing with other floor amendments to the underlying introduced budget bill, next up is an amendment by Delegate O'Quinn, item 369, number 1H.
The gentleman from Washington, Mr. O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Explaining the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Budget Amendment number 369 1H is put in and is in response to the February 9 decision by the United States Supreme Court in their unprecedented decision to stay the EPA's Clean Power Plan. Essentially, the stay means that the EPA cannot move forward on implementation or enforcement until the Supreme Court makes a final ruling on this. And so the states, regardless of how they feel or don't feel about this particular plan, has no obligation to actually move forward on this. And should the Clean Power Plan be overturned, there's going to be a lot of effort and time and resources that will have been wasted. And even if the Supreme Court does uphold the Clean Power Plan, the deadlines are likely to be significantly expanded. And so, speaking for myself and hopefully a majority of members here, I think it would be a fool's errand to continue wasting the Commonwealth's resources on developing something that may never come to fruition. And so, so this budget amendment has the support of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, among others, and I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to adopt this floor amendment.
The gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Speaking of the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Supreme Court stay, just to be clear, does not strike down the Clean Power Plan, nor does it prevent states from implementing strategies to reduce carbon emissions. Rather, as the case works its way through the courts, it allows for more time to evaluate various compliance options should the rule remain in place. The prudent path forward is to continue to evaluate what these compliance options mean for Virginia. Both Dominion and Appalachian Power are preparing their next integrated resource plans. which will be filed with the State Corporation Commission on May 1st, and which evaluate options for compliance with the Clean Power Plan. DEQ should be allowed to continue its coordinated and thoughtful stakeholder process to gauge what elements of a potential plan would work best for Virginia. This budget amendment would only further delay compliance, increasing the risk of the EPA writing Virginia's plan without any input from the Commonwealth. Furthermore, there is no guarantee that the deadlines under the final rule will change, even though the court has put a stay on the rule. As such, if the deadlines don't change and Virginia has done nothing to plan for compliance, the compliance costs could potentially be much higher than they need to be. Statements from utility executives further demonstrate that the stay does not mean utilities should delay planning. The Supreme Court stay, as was stated, doesn't really change anything, said Quinn Shea, Vice President of the Edison Electric Institute, the lobby association for investor-owned utilities. We're still reducing CO2 in the general curve in terms of our emissions reductions. That's not going to change because of the stay. You don't simply put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to major strategic investments that industry is making. Another quote, "I don't think the stay changes the projection," said John McManus, AEP's Vice President for Environmental Services. That is based on existing rules we know about and assumptions based on natural gas prices, electricity market prices, and customer demand. The implementation of the rule is stayed until its ultimate resolution. That doesn't prevent a state from doing something proactively, moving forward on its own. DEQ has in place a robust stakeholder process and is well on the way to creating the best compliance plan for Virginia. This amendment would only create serious regulatory uncertainty. I hope that we please oppose this amendment.
Shall the floor amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 63, noes 34.
Ayes 63, noes 34. The floor amendment is agreed to.
The next floor amendment before the body is offered by Delegate Marshall of Prince William. Item 4-1.01, number 1H.
The gentleman.
Mr. Speaker.
First, Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman report the amendment so I know which one the gentleman from Spotsylvania, Caroline, is going to object to?
Mr. Speaker, this is the amendment dealing with prerequisites for payment.
Yes, okay.
Gentleman Caroline, Ms. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by Amendment 1.01-1H.
I'd like to address just this one for my 2 minutes, and we can pass by the other one that I submitted that's similar to this. Mr. Speaker, the Dillon Rule has been part of not the Virginia statutes, but part of the operation of the law and the Constitution for more than 120 years. My language here comes from a 1896 decision involving the city of Winchester. And it states, in effect, that we're not going to have localities making decisions on their own as to what to fund, what not to fund. This is not a home rule state. So if we don't have that, then we don't have to worry about things like Montgomery County, Maryland, where they can impose, and they have, or they did, a local income tax. We've got some very aggressive individuals at the supervisorial level. We've got some expansive interpretations of the Commonwealth statutes, and I urge that you vote against the motion to pass by, to vote on something that has been a means of statutory, a rule of statutory construction, and make it a statute for at least the duration of this amendment. Thank you, of this budget. Thank you.
The questions on the motion from the gentleman from Carolina, Ms. Rorrock, to pass by the amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. Clerk will continue.
Next amendment offered by Delegate Marshall Item 4-1.02, number 1H, withholding of spending authority.
The gentleman from
Excuse me.
Danville, Mr. Marshall.
Would the gentleman just identify the nature of the amendment? I don't have it on my desk here.
Mr. Speaker, it's the withholding of spending authority.
Oh, it's yours?
Prohibiting the funds by an agency, political subdivision of the Commonwealth.
That's the same, similar amendment, so we can dispense with that.
Gentleman
Please withdraw it.
withdraws that amendment.
Okay.
First thing, nice thing you've done today. The clerk will continue.
Mr. Speaker, next floor amendment to the underlying budget bill offered by Delegate Hugo, item 4-5.01, number 4H.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
And Mr. Speaker, I always try to work in this system. I intend to withdraw this in a minute, but I just wanted to make the point that I appreciate meeting with the chairman of the appropriations this morning, the majority leader, to talk about looking at this issue in the off season, Mr. Speaker, meeting with you on this and have the joint committee look at this, because I think there is a problem. Again, as I said the other day, when we have $60 million going up to out-of-state students, and $50 million of that's coming just from 5 schools. And I've been intrigued over the last couple of days since I've given that speech to listen to the members from both sides of the aisle who are very interested in that and sympathetic. Because I know some of you have worried about school debt, college debt. Some of you worry about access, whether you're from suburban areas, Northern Virginia. I had folks from the rural areas come up and talk to me about the access and what this $60 million, how many more slots it could buy for a kid from down in Southwest Virginia or Southside, how much money it could reduce the tuition, or conversely, how many buildings we could build with $60 million a year, hundreds of million dollars over the last few years. But again, I look forward to working with the interested parties and the chairman and the majority leader and the speaker and all over the off season. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that the amendment be withdrawn.
The gentleman withdraws his amendment.
Next floor amendment is offered by Delegate Marshall of Prince William, item 4-5.03, number 2H, dealing with services and clients.
Gentleman from Caroline, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by the amendment.
Claiming my 2 minutes.
Gentleman has his time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This states that instead of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission handling all this loot that's going to come from these tolls inside the Beltway, that it's another organization, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Now, I've sued them and won. I sued them a second time because I missed a filing deadline and was unable to proceed with it. But the voting structure of the NVTC is as follows. Falls Church, which has 12,300 people, has 1 vote on the Transportation Commission. Loudon, with 312,000 people, has 1 vote on the Transportation Commission. Fairfax City, with 22,600 people, has 1 vote. Loudon, again, with 312,000 people, has 1 vote. This is strikingly out of balance, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the 450,000 people who live in Prince William, Manassas, and Manassas Park have no vote, yet this money in the 8th Planning District will be used without any single elected official having any input into this. Now, please consider this. I mean, really, this body is doing a severe disservice to those in Northern Virginia. At least let a body that is somewhat representative of the people of Northern Virginia administer these funds. That's all this does. So I urge, and please, go on record here. Let's not hide behind the voice vote.
The gentleman from Caroline, Mr. Orrock, has moved that we pass the amendment by. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Division. As many as favor the motion will raise their right hand. Oh, I think that's enough. Clerk will continue.
Continuing with the floor amendments to the underlying introduced budget. Next up is amendment offered by Delegate Marshall of Prince William, item 4-5.04, number 3H, dealing with special conditions and restrictions on expenditures.
Mr. Speaker, Could he clarify that? I did not. Is this the one with federal, with the federal government on guns?
I don't think he wrote it. You wrote that, didn't you?
Well, no, I'm just.
It is your amendment, isn't it?
No, I asked that this one be passed by, and if it mistakenly, the amendment item number 4-1.02, number 1H was passed by. I did not ask for that one to be passed by.
I think we did.
Mr. Speaker, I asked for a similar amendment to be passed by, and that similar amendment would have to do with the Dillon Rule, not with whether or not we're going to use federal funds or agree to use federal funds to implement Mr. Obama's regulations. There is no similarity between the Dillon Rule and this.
Okay.
Tommy's leaving. Tommy's going home. Tommy, where you going? Oh, Lord have mercy.
House will come to order. Members, please take your seats.
Mr. Speaker, Delegate Marshall, Prince William's floor amendment, item 4-5.04, number 3H, has been withdrawn. Mistakenly, I misreported the amendment number item 4-1.02, number 1H, is now before the body dealing with enforcement of federal regulations.
The gentleman, Carolina, Mr. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, I would move to pass by the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, claiming my 2 minutes after that nice sonorous motion.
The gentleman has his 2 minutes.
Thank you. 2 minutes in the sunlight. Okay. Mr. Speaker, this actually originated in a measure that the Courts of Justice Committee passed in 2014 with a similar proposal to state that Virginia would not enforce regulations imposed by the federal government or bills passed after a certain time. I think it was December 1st, 2013. That made it to the floor, and it was sent to the Appropriations Committee, where it never was heard from again. This was the substance of a bill that I introduced this session, which was sent to militia and police, and before there was a hearing on the merits of the case, it was sent by voice vote up to the Appropriations Committee. Mr. Speaker, I waited patiently and looked at my emails daily. I never saw a missive from the Appropriations Committee calling me up there to hold a hearing on this. So, Mr. Speaker, what this says is that because Mr. Obama has not issued all his regulations, and in fact, the Veterans Administration is turning over the names of individuals who've had people to assist veterans with their finances, much like members here who have somebody fill out their taxes, that they're supposedly not competent. I would like to say for 1 year we're not going to enforce these regulations. Look at them when they come back. If they're reasonable, we can do that. This provides an exception for enforcing a regulation that the Virginia State Police have with BATF for implementation of voluntary background checks at gun shows. And Mr. Speaker, I hope we do a record vote on this. Thank you very much.
The question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock, to pass the amendment by. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion agreed to. As many as favor the motion will raise their right hand. That's enough. The motion to pass by is agreed to.
Continuing with floor amendments, 2 more left. Next up.
Can we do them in block?
Floor amendment offered by Delegate Simon, item 4-6.07, number 1H.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I would move to pass by the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the motion.
Beg your pardon?
Speaking to the motion.
Gentleman has 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know that this will take 2 minutes. I hope it doesn't. Although I'm surprised I didn't get a visit from you or the majority leader about this amendment. So I thought maybe it was going to be all right. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this actually is a fairly serious subject, and this is important. Virginia state employees, everybody who works with and around Virginia government, deserves to be judged on their merit, on the job they do, not on their race, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation. Right? This is an opportunity for a do-over. We heard about a do-over motion a little earlier in the day. Our reputation as a state and a great place to do business took a hit a few weeks ago when this body passed out legislation that many of us, I think, characterize as a right to discriminate bill. All right? We did not get good publicity for that. My social media blew up about that. What is Virginia doing? This is an opportunity, members of this House, to send a signal that Virginia understands these issues, is a place that's welcoming to all kinds of people, a place that everybody can be judged on their merit, not on their race, their religion, or even their sexual orientation. I hope that it'll be the pleasure of the body to reject the motion to pass by so that we can adopt the amendment.
The question before the body is on the motion from the gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock, to pass by the amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Ayes and nay, there are sufficient. Shall the motion be agreed to?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, just a parliamentary inquiry. It sounds like they're thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ready, Mr. Speaker. I'm ready. Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 64, noes 35.
Ayes 64, noes 35. The motion to pass by is agreed to.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, the last floor amendment to the underlying budget bill offered by Delegate Marshall of Prince William, item 4-14- number 3H.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
I move to pass by the amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Prince William.
I move to address the amendment for 2 minutes.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, last fall, I think you spent, quite a wad of money about telling people that we weren't going to have tolls inside the Beltway. Well, now we're going to have tolls outside the Beltway, and one of the effects, which VDOT really doesn't want to tell me about because I've given them a number of FOIAs, and they've all given me kind of, deer in the headlight responses back. How many lanes are going to be there? Finally, at one public meeting, Secretary Lane, no relation to the other lanes, that was supposed to be a joke now, identified the fact that the shoulder lane will be going bye-bye, which means instead of 4 lanes that people have right now to travel from Haymarket or Centerville or anywhere in Prince William to the Beltway, you're going to have 3 lanes. 3 lanes. You will be compacting 4 lanes of traffic onto 3 lanes. This is not transportation progress. This is a transportation regress. Mr. Speaker, at least tell all the people in Northern Virginia, go on record that you want to compact them in 4 lanes and don't hide behind a verbal motion to pass by. So the folks on the other side, I'm going to ask for a record vote on this. I hope you put your hands up to demand a record vote. Mr. Speaker, I urge a no vote on the motion to pass by, and I ask for a recorded vote.
The questions on the motion by the gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock, to pass by the amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion is agreed to.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Prince William.
I'll ask for a record vote.
Ask for a record vote.
A yea and nay vote. Yes, one of those.
Yeah. As many as favor the motion will raise their right hand.
Speaker. Speaker.
This is on the motion to pass by the amendment. That's what you're asking about, right?
This is on seeking a recorded vote on the motion to pass by.
He's asking for the ayes and nays, Mr. Speaker.
Nays.
Okay. You can't do it by yourself. It's over.
I'm asking for you to count. Are there 20 people here for a record vote?
I could tell.
I thought I saw more than 20 hands up.
Really? Clerk will continue.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the floor amendments to the budget bill that are before the body.
Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, I move that have a motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Motion to dispense with the third constitutional reading and place the bill on passage.
Shall the third constitutional reading for House Bill 30 be dispensed?
Bless you.
Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The motion is agreed to. Shall the bill pass?
Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry. Clerk will destroy that. Gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could speak to the motion.
Beg your pardon?
Speaking to the motion.
Motion, okay.
Yes, thank you. One last benediction, if I may. There are 2 major elements that are not in the House budget that were in the governor's. We've heard a lot about Medicaid, but we also have another element, taxes paid by Virginians. What I'm about to say is all about the taxes paid by Virginia, but it's absolutely intertwined with refusing to expand Medicaid. The House budget contains a lot of choices. It chooses not to get back $2 million a year paid by Virginians to the federal government. It chooses not to provide basic health services for 350,000 low-income adults. However, it does choose to use 400% more in tax dollars to provide services to just a few of those adults. For example, we'll spend $5.4 million in state taxes to cover just 1% of that 350,000 who are seriously mentally ill, but we'll do it under the traditional 50-50 Medicaid funding. We could have chosen to spend just $1.1 million for the same coverage under 90-10 funding of the Affordable Care Act. Choices like this forced the other major choice in this budget. Not only to not get back the federal taxes that Virginians have paid, but to not give Virginia taxpayers the tax breaks the governor proposed, which were the personal exemption for each taxpayer and each family member. It'll continue to be $930, just $930. Back in the 1970s, they were the same as the federal tax personal exemption. The federal exemption is now $4,000. Again, Our Virginia taxpayers only get $930 for every family member as a personal exemption. The governor also proposed Virginia's corporate tax decrease, but no, it will continue to be 6%, while North Carolina just dropped theirs from 7% to 5% and may take it lower. Because of significant tax law changes a couple of decades ago, the corporate income tax is now mostly paid by just major employers, the kind that depend on large workforces of support jobs, true middle-class families. What choice will these major employers make when they have the option to locate 50 miles either side of Virginia's southern border? That whole wide swath of Virginia where citizens are suffering the highest unemployment, where jobs are needed most, and where we need to grow and diversify our economy. Refusing to dispassionately look at the economics of the Affordable Care Act, as so many states have, remains a major missed opportunity, not only for the 350,000 low-income without health coverage, but especially for Virginia taxpayers.
Shall the bill pass? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 2.
Ayes 98, noes 2. The bill is passed. This concludes the special and continuing order on the budget bill. The clerk will continue with the calendar.
Calendar for today, regular calendar for today, Thursday, February 25th, 2016. Thursday, February 25th, 2016. First up, Senate bills on third reading uncontested. 15 bills in the uncontested block. Begin with Senate Bill 230, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the code relating to withholding of income taxes related penalties. Report for the Committee on Finance with a substitute.
The gentleman from Accomack, Mr. Bloxham.
I move the substitute, Mr. Speaker.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Accomack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now we've taken a bad Senate bill and made it into a good House bill. It now matches my House Bill 1331 that passed this chamber 98-0. I move the bill be accepted.
Continuing with the block on page 2 of the printed calendar, Senate Bill 162 is a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to family violence fatality review teams, definition of fatal family violence incident. Report to the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, current law, the Family Violence Review Team only sees cases where the abuse was the proximate cause of the death. This would make clear that if the abuse was part of the circumstances leading to the individual's death. I'll be the pledge of the body to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 206, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to the Administrative Process Act, ex parte communications. Report to the Committee on General Laws with an amendment.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The committee amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Shenandoah.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is a recommendation of the Code Commission dealing with communications between one party and a hearing officer in an Administrative Process Act hearing. Much like judges aren't supposed to talk to one side in a court case, this says that hearing officers in those APA cases should not have those communications as well. And I would move the bill pass.
Continuing with the block, Senate Bill 210 is a bill to amend and reenact 3 sections of the code and repeal 1 or 2 others, all relating to automobile clubs. Reported for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 210 repeals the provisions relating to the licensure of automobile clubs by the State Corporation Commission. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Thank you.
Turning to page 3 of the printed calendar, Senate Bill 248, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to authority to consent to physical evidence recovery kit examinations, minors. Report to the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the current circumstance is if a minor is going to be subjected to a rape kit examination, the parent has to give consent. This change in the law would make clear that the minor themselves can give consent because it could be a circumstance where the custodial parent or the adult unable to give permission was the offender. Hope it be the pleasure of the body to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 287, a bill to amend and reenact 3 sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the prescription monitoring program. Reported for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this measure clarifies that there's a 24-hour window which the the pharmacist shall communicate to the department the reporting requirements, further clarifying the consultation provisions and the recording of information in the patient's file. Purely technical is my interpretation. I hope it be the pleasure of the body to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 493, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, closed meeting not authorized for discussion of pay increases for local governing bodies and elected school boards. Report for the Committee on General Laws with an amendment.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Speaker. I move the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendment? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Committee amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Shenandoah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The title is self-explanatory, just not authorizing closed meetings for discussion of pay increases under the Freedom of Information Act, and I would move the bill pass.
Continuing with the block, page 4 of the printed calendar, Senate Bill 556, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to opiate addiction treatment licensure, non-methadone opioid replacements. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this just makes clear that other opioid replacement drugs will not be a part of what would be a cause for a facility not to locate in certain areas. It will be the pleasure of the body to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 562, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to health benefits plans, amendments to federal law. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 562 allows health carriers to continue to sell health plans when when provisions of the Affordable Care Act are amended by federal law. I hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 564 has been moved to the regular calendar. Page 5 of the printed calendar. Next up in the uncontested block, Senate Bill 582, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to credit unions, voluntary mergers. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor with amendments.
The gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. Gentleman from Scott.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this represents the final deal that the banks and the credit unions were able to reach, where it would move the provisions up to 35,000 members, and the credit unions could merge with someone 35,000 or under, and could merge once every 2 years. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Senate Bill 592, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to vital records, amendments of death certificates. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 592 simply makes a little simpler process whereby death records can be amended when there was an error either in the name or other technical circumstances that would be a part of that legal document. It will be the pleasure of the body to pass the bill.
Questions on adoption committee substitute? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Substitutes agreed to.
Continuing with the block on page 6 of the printed calendar, Senate Bill 640, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to proceeds and avails of annuity contracts and life insurance policies, claims of creditors. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Gentleman Scott, Ms. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 640 would provide that cash surrender value and proceeds of any policy of life insurance or annuity contract would be and other items such as optional settlements or deposit with any companies made pursuant to such policy would be exempt from certain creditors' actions. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Thank you.
Senate Bill 679, a bill to require the Department of General Services to provide fiscal data pertaining to certain enhancement or remedial measures implemented by the governor. Report for the Committee on General Laws with an amendment.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendment? As many as favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Amendment's agreed to. Gentleman from Shenandoah.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill requires the Department of General Services to provide the General Assembly with a dashboard compilation of purchase orders, purchase order reports from the Commonwealth's statewide electronic procurement system consisting of aggregated data showing current fiscal year purchase orders from the previous fiscal year, and other relevant data, et cetera. I move that the bill pass.
And, Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 688, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to limited liability companies, registered agent. Report from the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Gentleman Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill simply allows a limited liability company to appoint an officer or an employee to receive service, process, or demands. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Shall the bills pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The bills are passed.
Continuing with the calendar, page 7 of the printed version. Next up, Senate bills on third reading regular calendar. Senate bills third reading regular. Senate Bill 665, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to middle school athletics, pre-participation physical examination. Report to the Committee on Education with amendments.
The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to move the committee amendments.
The questions on the adoption of the committee amendments, as many as favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The committee amendments are agreed to. Gentleman from Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate Bill 665 is a recommendation of the Virginia Commission on Youth. And basically what this bill would do is require all student athletes in middle school who participate in school-sponsored athletics to have a precipitation. It's been a long day, Mr. Speaker. Physical examination. Mr. Speaker, there were a number of questions by members. Right now, under current law, when a student enters elementary school, they are required to have a physical. The purpose of that is for immunizations and the like. In middle school, there's no requirement. In high school, students that participate in athletics have to have a physical examination because of the Virginia High School League requirements that they have. The problem and the reason for this bill is in middle school, students in 8th grade are JV students that are students who participate in JV athletics. There is no requirement that they participate or have a physical to participate, but that needs to occur based on a study and information that the Virginia Commission on Youth found. In addition, this will help the schools related to liability issues. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, the House will pass the bill.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 70, noes 30.
Ayes 70, noes 30. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, having voted on the prevailing side by which we passed the uncontested block of bills on the uncontested calendar, I would move that we would reconsider that vote so that a member who was unavailable could cast his vote.
The gentleman from Shenandoah moves that having voted on the prevailing side by which we passed the uncontested block, we reconsider that vote. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. Shall the bills pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The bills are passed.
Returning to Senate bills on third reading regular calendar, Senate Bill 207, a bill to amend and reenact sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the Administrative Process Act, reconsideration of formal hearings. Report for the Committee on General Laws with amendments.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments. As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. The gentleman from Shenandoah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this bill is another recommendation of the Code Commission that allows or puts in place a process by which a party can appeal and have reconsidered a ruling of a judge in an Administrative Process Act hearing, and I would move the bill pass.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 8 of today's printed calendar, Senate Bill 305, a bill to require the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation to provide certain notices in English and Spanish regarding the handling of asbestos. Report for the Committee on General Laws.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, again, the title or the description is accurate. This bill would provide notices to persons handling asbestos in both English and Spanish, and I would move the bill pass.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 75, noes 25.
Ayes 75, noes 25. The bill is passed.
Senate Bill 395, a bill to direct the State Corporation Commission to evaluate the establishment of protocols for energy efficiency programs implemented by investor-owned electric companies. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is similar to House Bill 1053, which is my bill dealing with energy efficiency. The only difference is it asks the State Corporation Commission to establish a methodology for estimating annual kilowatts savings and a formula to calculate the levelized cost of the saved energy for the energy efficiency measures. This also was added on to the Senate in my bill. So I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 89, noes 8.
Ayes 89, noes 8. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 9 of the printed calendar, Senate Bill 745, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to electric utilities, notice of renewable power options. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, House Senate Bill 745 is identical to House Bill 444. Posse's bill. Lost my volume. Anyway, it was identical to Lou Posse's bill, House Bill 444, asking the State Corporation Commission to post on its website information related to renewable electric power options. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to pass the bill.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 0.
Ayes 97, noes 0. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker, returning to page 4 of today's calendar, Senate Bill 564, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to the Freedom of Information Act, exclusions for school personnel licensure applications. Report for the Committee on General Laws.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this bill indeed excludes from FOIA applications for licensure for school personnel and related documents such as transcripts, and I would move that the bill pass.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this bill does amend the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and expands the exemptions of records that are not disclosed to the public. And in fact, it creates a new policy of records that are kept secret, which are the applications of teachers and other school personnel, all the way from even elementary to public universities. And, applications are in essence a resume, and therefore the qualifications of these instructors and essentially everybody, even school administrators, are now kept from the public. I do not believe it's moving in a positive direction of greater transparency for our citizens, and that's why I will not be supporting Senate Bill 564. Thank you.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 93, noes 3.
Ayes 93, noes 3. The bill is passed.
Returning to page 10 of the printed calendar, the next section, House bills with Senate amendments. House bills with Senate amendments. First up, House Bill 332, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code related to concealed handgun permits judges. The bill passed the House February 3rd, passed Senate with amendment H to substitute on the 22nd.
The gentleman from Manassas, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now that I know that the gentleman from Charlottesville, the minority leader, has concerns with the issues that our good friends over at the Virginia Citizens Defense League have, I'd like to let the body know that there's some language in the Senate proposal here that they have concerns with. And so to make this bill move forward, and so to let the minority leader know, because I know he would want to reject these amendments so we can address the VCDL's concerns. So I'll move that we reject the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 0, noes 97.
Ayes 0, noes 97. The Senate amendments are rejected.
Continuing with House Bill, Senate amendments, House Bill 646, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services related to substance abuse, report on state plan for substance abuse services. The bill passed the House January 27th, passed Senate with an amendment and nature substitute on the 22nd.
The gentlewoman from Petersburg, Ms. Aird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, several weeks ago, this body passed House Bill 646, my bill, my very first bill, and unfortunately, the Senate has gotten their hands on it. Because I do not agree with the changes that the Senate has made, I would ask that the members of this body join me and reject the Senate substitute.
Shall the Senate substitute be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 0, noes 97.
Ayes 0, noes 97. The Senate amendments are rejected.
Next up, House Bill 340, a bill directing the Board of Agriculture and Consumer Services to adopt regulations for private animal shelters. Passed the House February 9th, passed the Senate with a substitute on the 23rd.
From Carolina, Ms. Warrock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, my initial objective in House Bill 340 was to have a way whereby the stakeholders could address questions as to what a private animal shelter can or cannot do. The Senate substitute, which I've embraced and the language was suggested to me by the initial opponents, puts in place where that they will go into the regulatory process and work it out. That was my ultimate goal. I ask that the body will accept the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate substitute be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The Senate substitute is agreed to.
And House Bill 562, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the Code of Virginia relating to licensure of massage therapists. Bill passed the House January 29th, passed the Senate with amendments on February 23rd.
The gentlewoman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 562 needed some technical tune-ups, and so I would ask that you accept the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1. The Senate amendments are agreed to.
Continuing with today's calendar, page 12 of the printed version, the next category of bills, House joint resolutions with Senate amendments. HJs with Senate amendments. House Joint Resolution 69, establishing a joint subcommittee to study the use of driver's license suspension as a collection method for unpaid court fines and costs. Report. The resolution agreed to by the House February 11th, agreed to by the Senate with amendments on the 23rd.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Lupasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, so we had this House joint resolution last year, and it passed over there. And then we got into this to-do about how many senators we're going to have on the body and how many delegates we're going to have, and we never could reach an agreement. And so right now, we're here again. And my hope is that cooler heads will prevail and we'll be able to work all these matters out. And so we're going to need to get these things into conference. And so I ask for you to reject the Senate amendment.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 1, noes 99.
Ayes 1, noes 99. The Senate amendments are rejected.
I'm sorry. House Joint Resolution 84, continuing the joint subcommittee to formulate recommendations for the development of a comprehensive and coordinated planning effort to address recurrent flooding as the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding. Report. The joint resolution was agreed to by the House on February 11th. It was agreed to by the Senate with amendments on the 23rd.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Stolle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill has the similar issues with the Senate as Delegate Lupasi's did, where they changed the membership between the House and Senate. I ask that the House reject the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 0, noes 100.
Ayes 0, noes 100. The Senate amendments are agreed to. They're not agreed to. They're rejected. Something like that. Whatever. It's been a long day.
Continuing with the calendar, page 13, the printed version, House Joint Resolution 97, directing the Joint Commission on Technology and Science to study aspects of the Commonwealth aerospace industry. Report. Resolution agreed to by the House delegates on the 10th of February, agreed to by the Senate of Virginia with a substitute on the 23rd.
The gentleman from Newport News, Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, House Joint Resolution 97, which passed this body, came up with a plan for the growth of the aviation industry in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Senate is still trying to come up with a plan. Mr. Speaker, members, I would reject the Senate substitute.
Shall the Senate substitute be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 1, noes 99.
Ayes 1, noes 99. The Senate amendments are rejected.
House Joint Resolution 112, establishing a joint committee of the House Committee on Education and the Senate Committee on Education and Health to study the future of public elementary and secondary education in the Commonwealth. Report agreed to by the House February 15th, agreed to by the Senate with amendments on the 23rd.
The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Joint Resolution 112 has the similar situation that Delegate LaPasi, Delegate Stolle, and I believe Delegate Yancey had. And I have the utmost confidence in our majority leader to negotiate a equitable and fair resolution to all of these. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, we need to reject the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 0, noes 99.
Ayes 0, noes 99. The Senate amendments are rejected.
And Mr. Speaker, House Joint Resolution 197, designating April 16th in 2016 and each succeeding year as Chagas Disease Awareness Day in Virginia, agreed to by the House on February 2nd, agreed to by the Senate with amendments on the 23rd.
The gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill basically designated Chagas Awareness Day in Virginia. We were making a small change to change the Chagas Awareness Day in Virginia to conform with the International Chagas Awareness Day on April 14th. I hope we will accept the Senate amendments.
Shall the Senate amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 92, noes 7.
Ayes 92, noes 7. The Senate amendments are agreed to.
Mercifully. That completes the calendar, Mr. Speaker.
Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
No communications. Have one announcement before we do the meeting schedule. The Speaker appoints the Committee of Conference for House Bills 29 and 30. Committee of Conferees, part of the House will be Delegates Jones, Cox, Landis, O'Bannon, Greason, and Torian. Budget conferees for 29 and 30, Delegates Cox, Jones, Landis, O'Bannon, Greason, and Torian. Mr. Speaker, looking ahead to this afternoon here at 4:20, the Committee on General Laws will be meeting immediately upon adjournment of the House downstairs in House Room 1. This is a change in time and location for General Laws, which will meet immediately upon adjournment downstairs, House Room 1 here at the Capitol. Then General Laws Subcommittee Number 1, they'll be meeting immediately upon adjournment, a half hour after adjournment of the House over in House Room C. General Laws Sub 1 across the way in the GAB, a half hour after adjournment. Then Subcommittee Number 4 of General Laws, they will meet immediately upon adjournment of Subcommittee 1, again in House Room C, change in time for both. Finally, General Laws Sub 2 will be meeting immediately upon adjournment of Subcommittee Number 4, all at House Room C. General Laws downstairs, all the subcommittees across the way. Commerce and Labor today, that meeting has been canceled. The Rules Study Subcommittee will be meeting at a half hour after adjournment over in the 6th floor Speaker's Conference Room. The
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Knight.
Studies rules will meet immediately upon adjournment.
I apologize. Rules Studies Subcommittee immediately upon adjournment over in the 6th floor Speaker's Conference Room. The ACNR Chesapeake Subcommittee meeting, that's been canceled. Similarly, Appropriations, Comp and Retirement Subcommittee meeting, that's been canceled. Militia, Police, and Public Safety Subcommittee Number 1, that meeting has been canceled, as has P&E Campaign Subcommittee. So the last meeting for this afternoon, opportunity to gather, would be the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, which will meet at 5 o'clock in the 6th floor Senate Leadership Conference Room. Looking ahead to tomorrow, Friday, February 26th. First meeting will be at 8 o'clock tomorrow. CC&T, County Cities and Towns, will meet at 8 o'clock down in House Room D. Militia, Police, and Public Safety will meet across the hall in House Room C, also at 8 o'clock. That's a change in time for MIPS. Then also at 8, Finance Subcommittee Number 3. They're going to be meeting at 8, but they'll be up in the 4th floor West Conference Room. That's a change in time for Finance Sub Number 3. The Ben Franklin Liberty Caucus and the New American Caucuses, they will not be meeting tomorrow. Privileges and Elections Committee will meet at 9:30 tomorrow in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. And then, since we'll be going in a little bit later, the Democratic caucus will be meeting at 10:30 a.m. in House Room 2 downstairs. Republican caucus will meet at 10:30 in House Room 1, both here in the Capitol. That completes the announcements I have at this time.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move when the House adjourn today to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 11 a.m.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves that when the House adjourn today, it adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 11 a.m. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now adjourn.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves the House do now adjourn. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.